Hi guys. Tonight we step into the kind of darkness that makes you pull your blanket a little tighter. Picture yourself trudging through a frozen clearing, the air thick with mist that tastes of pine and smoke. The trees stand like silent guards, their branches crusted in snow. Somewhere ahead, a faint orange glow flickers through the fog. That's your shelter for the night, a humble wooden hut built by hands long gone. The snow crunches beneath your boots, the wind hums in your ears, and every step reminds you that warmth is a rare treasure in this world. You probably wouldn't survive this without a bit of medieval ingenuity, so tonight we'll see just how they did it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights and follow me into the story. You stand before the hut. Its roof bows slightly under the weight of snow, and smoke curls lazily from a hole in the thatch. The door, made from uneven planks held together by iron nails, looks like it has seen more winters than most people. You push it open with a long creak, the sound of age and cold wood complaining. Warm air greets you, heavy with the scent of peat smoke and damp wool. Inside, it's dim. The fire in the center burns low, casting a trembling circle of amber on the dirt floor. A single log crackles, throwing sparks that vanish into the smoky air. You step in, closing the door behind you. The world outside disappears, swallowed by darkness. The air inside is alive, thick and human. You hear the soft murmur of someone shifting under a heap of blankets, the faint drip of melted frost falling from the rafters, and a quiet cough from the far corner. The hut isn't big, no bigger than a modern bedroom, but it holds a universe of survival. Your eyes adjust. You see the rough-hewn beams that make up the frame, still smelling faintly of resin. Between them, gaps stuffed with moss and clay block out the winter wind. The walls glisten where heat meets frost, and every beam tells a story of repetition. Chop, build, patch, endure. In one corner, a small wooden chest sits beneath a hanging cloak. In another, bundles of straw form a makeshift bed. You imagine the people who once lived here, farmers, shepherds, small folk, scraping through the season on what the land could give. You lower yourself onto a wooden stool beside the fire. It creaks beneath your weight. The warmth doesn't travel far, so you hold your hands close to the flame, feeling the sting of returning blood in your fingers. The fire is small, careful. Every log was precious, cut weeks before the first snow and guarded like treasure. Historians know that winter fuel shortages often decided who made it to spring. It wasn't just about comfort, it was survival math. Too much wood burned too soon, and you'd freeze by February. Too little, and illness would settle in your bones. A faint draft brushes your neck. You turn and see where the door doesn't quite meet the frame. A rag is stuffed in the gap, the edges stiff with frost. It's a reminder that these huts were never perfect. The medieval poor relied on what nature offered, and sometimes that meant living inside what felt like a glorified barn. But still, they adapted. Some huts were built half dug into the ground, using the earth's own warmth to hold heat. Others lined the inner walls with woven wattle and daub branches plastered with mud and straw to trap every bit of warmth possible. You take in the smell of it all: smoke, sweat, wet wool, and faint animal musk. It's strangely comforting, like the scent of persistence. The air feels heavy but alive. Your breath fogs in the chill that lingers beyond the hearth's reach. You realize the rhythm of this life was slower, closer to the heartbeat of nature. Night fell early and lasted long. People moved with the pace of their candles, not their clocks. In the background, a child murmurs in sleep, curling tighter under a blanket of sheep's wool. The mother beside him stirs, adding a pinch of dried herbs to the fire. The air fills with a faint sweetness, lavender perhaps, or mugwort, thought to calm dreams. Historians still argue whether such herbs were for scent or superstition. Either way, the result is the same: a gentle perfume rising in the smoky air. whispering of care and hope in hard times. You shift on your stool, noticing how the smoke doesn't rise straight up but curls and pools before slipping through a hole in the roof. The hut's design is clever, if rough. Without a chimney, the smoke warms the air before escaping, coating the rafters in black soot that, in a strange way, preserves the wood from insects. The walls might be thin, but this was insulation enough for those who knew how to use it. It's a detail that feels both accidental and brilliant, like most medieval inventions. Outside, the wind sighs through the forest. The sound of snow shifting from branches is like a slow exhale. You imagine what it must have been like to step outside in that darkness. No street lights, no hum of cities, just the vast silence of a world asleep. For those inside, the hut wasn't just shelter, it was the thin line between life and death. Your gaze drifts to the floor, hard-packed earth softened with a scatter of straw. Every step makes a soft rustle, like whispering pages. The straw was changed often, partly to keep insects away and partly to absorb the moisture that crept up from the ground. Sometimes, herbs were mixed in pennyroyal, tansy, thyme to keep fleas at bay. Quirky, yes, but it worked. Some of these same herbs are still used in natural repellents today. The fire crackles lower now. You lean back, letting your mind wander. It's easy to romanticize these huts, but life here was raw. You can almost feel the hunger that lingered through each winter, the ache in the hands that chopped wood, the quiet pride in surviving one more season. And yet, there's beauty in that struggle, a rhythm we've lost. The hut, the fire, the family huddled together. It's not much, but it's everything. As you close your eyes, the glow of the fire softens to a blur. The smoke swirls, the timbers sigh, and the cold beyond the door feels far away. For a moment, you belong here, another soul finding warmth in the deep medieval night. The door creaks open again, and a gust of night air slips in like a ghost. You catch the chill instantly, sharp and clean against your cheeks. Behind you, the small flame shivers, its glow wobbling across the hut's rough walls. You pull the door shut and press your palm to the wood, feeling the thud of the latch as it drops into place. The wind outside hisses softly through the gaps, like a distant whispering crowd. Inside, the world smells of survival. You look around, and your eyes start to read the room. The glow of the fire reveals simple shapes: a bench, a stool, bundles of cloth hanging from hooks, and a corner that might serve as a bed. Every object earns its keep here. There is no waste, no decoration for decoration's sake. You can almost hear the hut's quiet logic saying, if it cannot warm you or feed you, it does not belong. You sit back down and notice the sheen on the inner walls, a mix of sap and smoke that makes them glisten. The pitch from the pine used in building gives off a faint sweetness, the kind of scent that lingers on your fingertips long after you touch it. Medieval builders knew pine for its resin-rich durability, and they coated the wood with animal fat or tar to protect it from damp. A simple trick, yet it kept many homes from rotting through endless winters. In the dim light, you see where children's fingers once traced patterns in the soot. Smudges of faces, perhaps, or little marks to pass time when snow trapped families indoors for days. You imagine how they must have counted the hours between light and dark, measuring life by fire instead of clock. Historians say that in many northern villages, winter days became nearly timeless, blurring into each other until the only rhythm left was tending the flame. A woman might have spent her evenings patching clothes, her eyes straining under the dim firelight. Needles were precious, often made from bone or brass, kept carefully in little pouches. You picture her holding one up close to the flame, threading it with a strand of rough wool. There's something intimate about that image, something steady. Outside, a blizzard could howl, but inside she'd be mending life one stitch at a time. In one corner, a clay oil lamp sits, its flame barely brighter than a candle. The oil is animal fat mixed with herbs, the wick twisted from linen scraps. You can almost hear the faint hiss as the flame licks the rim. It's not enough to light a room, but enough to find your way to bed. Many medieval huts used lamps like this because candles were expensive luxuries. The wealthy had beeswax, but peasants burned tallow, which smoked and smelled faintly rancid. That smell would cling to the air, to the clothes, even to dreams. You take a deep breath and feel the heat settle around you. The air closest to the hearth is heavy with warmth, but a step toward the door, and the cold bites again. Temperature gradients like this defined the medieval night. People would cluster close to the center, backs to the walls, bodies angled toward the flames. The further from the fire, the deeper the chill. It was a shared understanding of space, a quiet geometry of survival. Your eyes linger on the hut's small window, or rather, the hole that serves as one. A sheet of oiled parchment covers it, letting in a dull amber glow by day and keeping out drafts by night. Glass was a rarity, a thing for churches and noble homes. For everyone else, animal horn or stretched bladder did the trick. It gave privacy, a little light, and a reminder that luxury wasn't the same as comfort. You can almost imagine the sound of the wind rattling that window covering, a soft tremor that seems to breathe with the storm outside. From above, you hear a faint drip. Meltwater seeps through the thatch where snow has begun to thaw near the smoke hole. The thatching is tight, layered with straw and reeds, sometimes even seaweed in coastal villages. It's an ancient craft, one that demanded precision. Each layer overlaps like fish scales, angled so rain runs off and snow slides down instead of soaking in. Historians still debate whether the earliest builders learned this method from nature or from the Romans who left traces of their architecture across the countryside. Either way, it worked. Some huts have stood for centuries, their thatch thick as a winter pelt. You tilt your head and listen to the structure breathe. The timbers creak as they settle, responding to every gust outside. The sound isn't alarming. It's almost comforting, like the groan of an old friend stretching in the cold. The hearth beats at its center, the wind its breath, and you the lone witness to its quiet endurance. In the corner, you spot a small basket lined with bits of cloth. It holds roots, dried berries, and something that looks like garlic. This, perhaps, was a household pharmacy. Garlic was prized not only for cooking but for keeping away sickness and spirits alike. A quirky fact that still lingers in some traditions today. There's an old tale about rubbing garlic on the doorframe to stop frost spirits from entering, though historians can't agree whether people truly believed it or just liked the excuse for superstition. Either way, the air in here smells faintly of it, sharp and alive. You sit quietly, feeling the warmth of the fire crawl up your arms. The flames move lazily, each flicker tracing orange shadows across the roof. The smoke folds and drifts through the small hole above, carrying whispers of heat into the night. It's mesmerizing. The longer you watch, the more the modern world seems to fall away. You start to feel how deeply this kind of life ran, how it shaped people's patience, their endurance, their closeness to one another. There is no hum of machinery, no glowing screen, only the hush of breathing and the crack of burning wood. You think of the countless nights that passed like this, of people sitting right where you are, listening to the same sounds, worrying the same worries, whispering the same prayers. The hut, the fire, the family, these were constants when everything else froze. You lean back against the wall. The rough wood presses against your shoulder, and the warmth seeps in from the side where the fire's heat has soaked the beams. The smell of pine and smoke fills your lungs, and your eyelids grow heavy. Outside, the snow keeps falling, each flake drifting like a quiet blessing. And here you are, safe for now, sharing in the oldest rhythm of all, warmth, breath, and the promise of sleep. You shift your feet and realize just how cold the ground truly is. The fire keeps your face warm, but your toes tell a different story. Beneath you, the floor is nothing but packed earth sprinkled with straw, and each step releases a soft, dusty sigh. Your soles press into the cold, like pressing against a frozen riverbank. The sensation runs up your legs, a creeping reminder of how every inch of warmth must be earned. Most chroniclers of the time agreed that many huts didn't have raised floors at all. Only in the richer homes or in monasteries did people walk upon wooden planks. For everyone else, the ground was the ground, shared with insects, mice, and sometimes the damp breath of the soil itself. To make it livable, people layered rushes or straw across it, changing them whenever the smell became unbearable. An odd little custom survived in certain regions where sweet-smelling herbs like meadowsweet were mixed in to disguise the stench. It wasn't luxury, but it added a faint fragrance to the room, one that might even mingle with the smoke and create a sort of rough perfume of survival. You can almost feel the mixture beneath your feet, dry, crackling straw combined with the soft give of crushed herbs. There is something humble in it, yet clever too. It worked as insulation, however primitive. Modern archaeologists have found traces of multiple layers of reeds and sedges in old hut foundations, proof that people knew more about managing temperature than they're often given credit for. Evidence from the period shows that these layers could be several inches thick, enough to create a cushion against the freezing earth below. The idea of bare feet on straw feels strange to you now, maybe even a little brave. But to them, shoes were for outdoors. Inside, boots stayed by the door to dry beside the hearth. Walking barefoot was not a sign of poverty alone, but of practicality. You can almost hear the quiet shuffle of feet moving softly in the dim light, careful not to disturb the straw that helped keep the family warm. In one corner, near where the straw is thinnest, you notice dark stains where moisture once seeped through. It must have been a constant battle, the floor always on the edge of freezing. Some researchers question if villagers deliberately placed smooth stones near the fire pit to radiate heat overnight. There's no consensus, but it would make sense. Stone holds warmth longer than earth, and the trick might have been passed along by travelers from the south. Experts remain divided over whether this was common practice or just regional ingenuity, but either way, it speaks to how deeply necessity shaped invention. You crouch and run your hand along the straw. It scratches your skin but feels alive somehow. The smell is earthy, like dried hay and distant sunlight. Beneath it, the soil is hard as iron. You imagine the daily ritual of cleaning this floor, removing the old rushes, shaking them outside, then spreading a new layer before night. The task would fall to whoever rose first, likely the woman of the house or the eldest daughter, and she'd do it with practiced efficiency before dawn's first light touched the frost. There's something rhythmic in that idea, something calming. The repetition of small chores kept life steady when the world outside was chaos. It was said in some villages that sweeping away yesterday's straw also swept away yesterday's troubles. The belief might sound simple, but in long winters where hope was fragile, little rituals mattered more than reason. A curious detail often overlooked in these traditions is how cleaning became spiritual, a way to push back against despair when the nights grew too long. You glance toward the fire again. Its glow spills across the straw, making the floor shimmer in patches of gold and shadow. The flicker reveals footprints hardened into the dirt, faint traces of past movement. You wonder how many generations stood exactly where you stand now. How many cold mornings began with someone striking flint, blowing on a spark and praying the smoke would rise clean. Above you, the roof timbers creak softly. The sound blends with the wind outside, a duet of endurance and patience. You begin to understand that warmth wasn't just physical here. It was shared through presence. The floor may have been cold, but the closeness of others made it bearable. People slept side by side, sometimes two or three to a bed. Children nestled between parents. Privacy was rare, but connection was constant. You imagine lying down on that straw bedding, pulling a thin blanket of wool over your shoulders. The ground might feel unyielding at first, but as your body settles, you'd begin to feel pockets of warmth build beneath you, like little islands of comfort. It's not much, but it's enough to rest. And perhaps that was the secret, to find warmth not in what you owned, but in how you endured together. The straw rustles again, and for a moment it almost sounds like waves. You close your eyes and listen. The fire crackles. Someone coughs softly in the dark. Outside, the wind presses against the walls but doesn't break through. The hut holds steady, as if keeping its promise. Folklore hints at another explanation for the straw. Some said it wasn't just insulation but protection. The rustling of the dried stalks supposedly scared away wandering spirits that crept through cracks in winter. Whether or not anyone truly believed it, who can say? The records leave just enough mystery to wonder. But the image stays with you, the thought that even the smallest things, like straw beneath your feet, carried meaning and comfort in the coldest nights. You stretch your legs toward the fire, feeling the warmth creep closer. The flames shimmer and dance across the uneven walls, turning the hut into something almost alive. You can smell the straw, the smoke, the faint sweetness of herbs, and beneath it all, the scent of earth itself, ancient, grounding, and unchanging. You think of how far you are from the modern world, yet how close you feel to these long-gone souls. Your eyes grow heavy, your thoughts softening like snow falling through the dark. The cold is still there, but it no longer feels hostile. It feels familiar, part of the rhythm of existence. The fire hums quietly. The straw whispers beneath you, and the old floor breathes out its warmth, one slow heartbeat at a time. The fire pops, and a spark leaps out, landing close to your boot. You nudge it back into the embers and watch it vanish. The heat flares for a heartbeat, lighting up the faces of the logs. Fire, you realize, is not just warmth. It is authority. It decides how much comfort you get, how long you live, even how you sleep. Evidence from the period shows that the hearth was the heart of every medieval home. It wasn't simply a fireplace tucked against a wall. In many wooden huts, it sat in the center of the floor, a glowing island surrounded by low benches and sleeping spaces. It was where meals were cooked, stories told, wounds tended, and disputes settled. The family revolved around it like planets around a small red sundae. You study the way the smoke moves. It doesn't climb straight up, but swirls like a restless spirit before slipping through the hole in the roof. The air feels heavy with soot and life. Your eyes sting a little, and you understand why medieval lungs rarely got a break. But this smoke, irritating as it is, helped dry out thatch, deter insects, and even preserve meat that hung near the rafters. Many modern historians believe that the dark, smoky interiors we imagine weren't just the result of poor design, but of deliberate choice. Smoke was a guardian as much as a nuisance. An unusual superstition cropped up around that same idea. People believed the smoke carried prayers upward, that each twist and curl was a message sent to heaven. To sit in the smoke was to sit under blessing, though it often made your eyes water enough to doubt the favor. Still, the belief held strong, especially during midwinter when spirits were said to wander freely. It sounds fanciful, but when you live in a world where fire can both save and destroy, faith becomes a kind of warmth too. You lean closer and feel your cheeks glow. The hearth is built from river stones, blackened smooth from years of heat. Ash piles softly at the edges, light as snow. Beside the fire, a pot bubbles quietly, its lid rattling from time to time. You imagine the smell of stew, barley and root vegetables cooked down to a thick, smoky comfort. Meat would be a luxury, saved for feast days, but even a broth like this could keep the hunger quiet for a while. Most chroniclers of the time agreed that tending the fire was a task of near religious importance. Letting it die was more than inconvenience, it was a shame. In some villages, if your fire went out, you had to borrow a flame from a neighbor's hearth. They would carry it home in a clay pot, shielding it with their hands. To ask for fire was an act of humility, a reminder that everyone depended on everyone else to keep the light alive. The more you watch the fire, the more you see how alive it feels. It shifts and sighs like a breathing creature. Every flicker paints shadows that move along the walls, making the wooden beams seem to sway. You can almost believe the fire listens. In the dim hush of the hut, it becomes companion, protector, storyteller. But fire was also a threat. Without a chimney, sparks could drift into the thatch above, and in one unlucky moment, the entire home could vanish in flame. Contemporary accounts make it clear that winter fires often led to village-wide disasters. Once a roof caught, there was little anyone could do. Buckets froze. Snow buried wells. People could only watch as their hard-earned shelter turned to smoke and ash. To them, fire was both gift and test, never to be trusted completely. Some researchers question if certain building rituals were meant to tame that danger. Archaeologists have found small charms buried beneath hearthstones, bits of pottery, animal bones, even coins. These might have been offerings to household spirits or perhaps good luck tokens placed by builders. No one fully agrees why they were there, but it feels right that something so powerful would inspire both respect and superstition. You think of the modern luxury of striking a match without worry. Here, every spark was a prayer, every ember a responsibility. Imagine waking in the middle of the night to feed the fire, eyes heavy with sleep but hands practiced in the dark. People learned to stir the coals gently, burying them under ash so they would smolder until dawn. It was a delicate art. Too much air and they'd flare up, too little and they'd die. There was no second chance. You look again at the glow, its edges dimming. The family that once lived here might have gathered now, kneeling around the hearth, murmuring short prayers for warmth. Children would extend their hands and laugh as their shadows danced across the wall. The firelight would flicker over faces, softening them, making everyone look younger for a moment. You pick up a small stick and prod the embers, and the sound they make is like whispering sand. Sparks float upward, tiny suns rising into the darkness. The air fills with the sharp scent of burnt resin, and you imagine that smell clinging to your hair, your clothes, your dreams. The fire doesn't just warm the room, it claims it. Every surface, every breath belongs to it. There's something meditative about watching it. You begin to understand how people could sit like this for hours, talking softly or saying nothing at all. The fire became their entertainment, their comfort, their measure of time. When the flames sank low, the night deepened. When they rose, morning was near. A curious detail often overlooked in written accounts is that many huts didn't bother to extinguish their fires even in summer. The hearth was eternal. It symbolized the life of the household, passed down through generations. If someone died, a log might be taken from their hearth to light a new one in the home of their kin. The flame was continuity itself. The crackle steadies again, pulling you back from thought. You sit quietly, the warmth licking your face, the cold licking your back. The two elements meet in you, perfectly balanced for now. Outside, the wind continues to hum through the trees. Inside, you have light, warmth, and a sense of something very old, very human, and still very alive. The wind groans against the walls as if testing the hut's courage. Each gust makes the wooden beams creak, the sound deep and tired, like a giant stretching in the dark. You glance up and watch the shadows tremble where the light of the fire reaches. The hut feels fragile tonight, yet it endures. The walls seem to whisper, not with words, but with memory. According to common practice in medieval Europe, huts like this were built from logs or split planks stacked tightly together, their seams stuffed with moss and clay. The result was something simple, but clever. The materials were all local, easy to repair, and warm once the interior air heated up. Still, no wall was perfect. Cold air always found a way inside, slipping through cracks like invisible fingers. The struggle against the wind was constant, and people grew skilled at listening for it. A faint whine in one corner meant a gap. A low hum in another meant a loose board. They patched and stuffed until the sounds softened to silence. You reach out and touch the wall beside you. The wood feels rough but alive, its surface scored by tools. Tiny ridges catch the firelight. You can sense how it must have been shaped by hand, each plank fitted by sight and instinct. Builders didn't use rulers in every village. They measured by palms, by eyes, by memory. It was an art more than a science, and yet it worked well enough to hold back the cold. An odd little custom survived in some northern regions. People smeared animal fat along the base of their walls to block out drafts and discourage insects. It sounds unpleasant, but it sealed gaps better than clay alone, and added an unexpected benefit. The smell kept rats away. Imagine that, the faint scent of tallow mingling with wood smoke, a fragrance only a medieval winter could invent. You listen as the wind shifts direction. It hits the wall at a different angle, and the wood responds with a quiet knock. The noise is oddly rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. You picture the family lying awake, listening to the hut talk to them through the night. To some, it was comforting. The sounds meant the walls were still standing. To others, they were eerie reminders of the outside world pressing in. There's ongoing discussion among historians about how much insulation these huts truly provided. Some believe that once the interior warmed, the timber retained heat surprisingly well. Others argue that drafts were unavoidable, that families relied more on body heat and bedding than on architecture. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, carried by generations of trial and error. You notice patches where clay once filled the spaces between logs. The color is faded now, dull brown streaked with soot. In its prime, it would have looked golden in the firelight, smooth and slightly damp. People used whatever materials they could find: mud, straw, horsehair, even dung to make the plaster. When it dried, it hardened like stone, sealing out both wind and sound. The walls became their own kind of skin, breathing just enough to keep the hut from suffocating. You move your hand and feel a draft sneak through a small gap near the corner. It brushes your wrist with icy fingers. The sensation makes you shiver. In the deep of winter, that little gap could mean the difference between comfort and misery. Some villagers hung woven mats or furs along the inner walls to trap the warmth, creating layers of softness that looked almost decorative. It was practicality disguised as beauty. There's something touching in that effort. You can imagine a mother pressing bits of moss into cracks while her children slept, her fingers stiff with cold but steady. Perhaps she hummed a small tune while she worked, a song she learned from her own mother, one that kept her mind from thinking about the frost creeping under the door. The details are lost to history, but the image feels true. You lean back and let the walls support you. The timber hums faintly under the wind's pressure. For a moment, you could almost believe the hut breathes with you. The sound of it settling feels steady, reassuring, like a lullaby made of wood and patience. A lesser-known habit of the time was to tuck charms into the gaps between boards. Small bones, feathers, or bits of cloth were thought to guard against spirits or ill fortune. Folklore from certain valleys even claimed that whispering your name into the wall would keep the cold from stealing your soul while you slept. Whether or not anyone truly believed this, it tells you how deeply they lived with their surroundings. A wall wasn't just a barrier, it was a guardian. You stare at the edges of the firelight, where the walls vanish into shadow. The sound of the wind fades for a moment, and silence fills the hut like water filling a bowl. You realize that these walls didn't just keep out weather, they held in the stories, the laughter, the fears of everyone who ever lived here. Every winter left a mark, invisible but real. Archaeological findings suggest that in some regions, villagers reinforced their huts by leaning spare planks or old cartboards against the outer walls during the harshest months. It added weight, stability, and a sense of safety, even if it didn't do much for warmth. They would remove them in spring, when light and air returned. The cycle repeated year after year, a rhythm of build, patch, endure. You listen again. The wind picks up once more. But now the walls no longer sound distressed. The wood groans but doesn't give. It holds, patient and sure. You imagine the satisfaction of hearing that as a builder, of knowing your work could withstand another storm. It must have felt like triumph, small but solid. The fire glows low now, painting the walls in amber and red. The shadows dance in long shapes that seem to move across the timber, as if the walls themselves remember the people who leaned on them. You find comfort in that thought. The hut isn't silent. It sings softly in wood and wind, reminding you that even the simplest shelter can feel alive when you listen closely. The night deepens, but the fire's pulse holds steady. You shift a little closer, wrapping your arms around yourself, watching how the shadows waver across the floor. The smell of warm wool lingers in the air. It comes from the bedding piled nearby. Thick layers of fabric, fur and straw that make up the medieval idea of comfort. You walk toward it and kneel, brushing your fingers across the surface. It feels coarse at first, then softer underneath. Archaeological evidence shows that common people slept on sacks filled with straw, reeds, or sometimes dried seaweed when near the coast. These sacks, called ticks, were laid directly on wooden boards or, for poorer families, on the earthen floor itself. Wealthier households used feathers instead, plucked from geese or ducks, creating beds that sagged like giant cushions. But for most, straw was the only choice. It crinkled under the weight of bodies, releasing a faint sweetness into the air, the smell of old harvest fields. You lift a corner of the blanket and find another layer underneath a pelt of some kind, stiff and shaggy. It could be sheep's wool or perhaps goat hide, still carrying the faint oily scent of the animal. These were prized for their warmth. People didn't just sleep under blankets, they nested within them. They arranged bedding like armor against the cold, layer upon layer until only their faces showed. A curious detail often overlooked is how often these beds were shared not just by family, but by guests. In winter, the warmth of another body could mean the difference between comfort and sickness. Travelers were welcomed, sometimes reluctantly, into homes that barely fit their own families. There was little room for modesty, but plenty for humanity. The practice created a strange intimacy among people who might never have spoken otherwise. You sit back and imagine the sounds, the rustle of straw, the muffled breathing, the occasional cough. It is both homely and haunting. In the middle of that tangle of limbs and blankets, warmth gathers slowly, spreading from one body to another until everyone's breath becomes a shared rhythm. Most chroniclers of the time agreed that changing the straw was a ritual in itself. It had to be done every few weeks, or sooner if dampness crept in. Old straw attracted lice, fleas, and worse. People shook it out, burned what was too dirty to save, and refilled the sacks with new stalks gathered from the barn. The smell of fresh straw was said to lift spirits, especially during the longest nights. It smelled like summer, like fields long gone under snow. You lie down and let the straw crackle beneath you. It molds slightly to your shape, uneven but comforting in its own primitive way. The texture reminds you that softness is relative. For someone used to sleeping on earth, this would have felt luxurious. For you, it's an exercise in imagination. Yet as you listen to the fire crackle and feel the warmth drift across the room, it doesn't seem impossible to fall asleep here. An old belief once circulated that straw carried memories of the field it came from. People said it kept the spirit of the sun locked inside, so even in the coldest night, it gave off a faint echo of warmth. It's a poetic idea, maybe born from wishful thinking, but it fits. You can almost sense the light trapped in each stem, whispering its history into the dark. Some researchers question if the bedding materials varied with region and wealth more than with climate. In Scandinavia, for example, records suggest moss and dried leaves were used under pelts, while in southern Europe, thin mats of reeds were preferred. The diversity tells a quiet story of adaptation, how every community learned to turn its landscape into comfort. Experts remain divided over how hygienic these arrangements truly were, but survival left little room for choice. You shift again and look at the blanket on top. It's thick, woven from wool dyed a dull brown, though once it might have been red or green. The pattern is uneven, the work of hand-spun thread. You run your palm along it, and tiny bits of lanolin oil cling to your skin, making it feel almost alive. Wool was the treasure of the medieval world. It clothed, fed, and sheltered nations. Entire economies were built on the back of sheep. When a blanket like this wore thin, it wasn't discarded, it was patched, rewoven, reborn into another form. In the corner of the hut, near the door, hangs a bundle of feathers tied with twine. It sways slightly in the draught. At first, it looks decorative, but then you notice the way it's positioned above the bedding. People once believed feathers could protect the sleeper from nightmares, especially if they came from white birds. A strange superstition, yet you can understand the comfort of thinking that something gentle guarded you through the dark hours. The air feels warmer here, held close by the thick bedding. You stretch your hand toward the firelight and see the reflection shimmer across the wool. The flicker looks like water, flowing softly over the surface. It's easy to imagine a whole family lying here, the parents whispering in the half-dark while the children slept, the room quiet except for the wind and the slow breath of the living. An odd little custom survived in a few mountain regions. Before sleep, people sprinkled salt or ash around their bedding to keep spirits and vermin away. Salt was expensive, so it wasn't done nightly, but on the coldest nights it served as both superstition and practicality. Salt dried the damp, ash masked the smell, and both carried a faint symbolic weight, purity, and protection. Whether anyone truly believed it or not, it made the darkness feel less lonely. You close your eyes for a moment, resting on the uneven comfort of straw and wool. The hut creaks softly as the wind shifts again. It sounds almost like a lullaby, old and cracked but kind. You can smell the faint sweetness of dried grass, the lingering smoke from the fire, the earthy scent of wool. Together they form something that feels whole, as if warmth itself has a texture. You open your eyes again and look toward the ceiling. Smoke gathers there, thick and ghostly, before escaping through the small hole in the roof. You think of all the centuries of sleepers who lay here before you, trusting the same fragile layers to keep the cold at bay. The walls might shift, the seasons might change, but sleep remains the same. Every human, no matter the century, searches for that soft place between waking and dreaming. The fire sighs, the straw whispers. You breathe in and feel the weight of the blankets hold you steady. For a brief moment, the world outside disappears, and you are only a small body wrapped in warmth, listening to the heart of winter beat gently around you. You stir the bedding slightly and hear the faint rustle of straw, like the soft turning of a page. The air feels thicker now, carrying the warmth that bodies have built through the long night. You glance toward the center of the hut and imagine the family gathering here before sleep, arranging their space carefully. The idea of a private bed belongs to the future. For most of history, sleep was a communal act, a shared ritual of survival. Surviving records reveal that families often slept together, especially through the coldest months. A single large bed might hold parents, children, and sometimes even an elderly grandparent or a visiting traveler. Space was limited, and heat was precious. It wasn't seen as strange or improper. It was necessity turned into routine. For many, this was how affection was expressed quietly, through closeness, through shared breath in the dark. You can picture it, a mother in the center, a child curled against her side, another at her feet, the father resting nearest the wall where the cold pressed hardest. Every position had its reason. People learned where warmth gathered best and how to balance comfort against airflow. The faint hiss of breath would fill the hut until it sounded like a single steady wind. An unusual superstition cropped up around this habit. Some villagers believed that sleeping too far from others could invite sickness, that solitude itself let the cold spirits enter the body. It wasn't just warmth they shared, but protection. The idea might sound strange now, yet when the night could kill, superstition and science blurred together like mist and smoke. There's ongoing discussion among historians about how intimacy and sleep customs shifted over time. In monastic communities, for instance, shared dormitories were the rule, yet strict silence and distance were enforced. In peasant homes, silence was impossible, and distance was ignored. The contrast reveals how social class shaped comfort as much as architecture did. What was a moral rule in a monastery was simple practicality in a hut. You sit near the fire again and imagine waking up among others. The feeling would be strange at first, elbows touching, breaths mingling, but after a while, it might feel deeply human. There is safety in warmth, and warmth in company. When the wind howled and wolves cried from the forest, a room full of slow breathing was proof that life endured. It is widely recorded that even travellers were welcome to these shared beds. The custom of bed rights allowed strangers to lie beside the family if they had nowhere else to go. Sometimes, a wooden plank divided the sleeping space for propriety, though in the dark and exhaustion of winter, such gestures were often forgotten. The bed became both inn and hearth, the truest symbol of hospitality. A small but fascinating twist to this story, how people developed an etiquette around shared sleep. One had to lie still, avoid kicking, and turn quietly when the others did. Snoring was tolerated but teased, and anyone who spoke too much risked a sharp elbow. Whispered jokes or songs often lulled the younger children to sleep before the fire dimmed. In the dim light, conversation faded slowly until the room sank into breathing and dreaming. You let your imagination wander further. Maybe one child stirred, murmuring nonsense words from a dream, and the mother reached out without opening her eyes, patting the small shoulder until stillness returned. Perhaps the father shifted, pulling the blanket higher as embers cracked. There were no alarm clocks, no concept of oversleeping. The day began when the fire died, when cold air kissed the face, when the first rooster crowed. Folklore hints at another detail. In some places, it was considered unlucky to lie down with your head toward the door. The soul, they said, might slip out during dreams and fail to find its way back. So families arranged their bodies according to the hut's layout, trusting in habit and tradition to guard their sleep. Such beliefs stitched the practical to the mystical until the two were inseparable. You close your eyes and listen to the sound of the hut around you. The wood sighs, the wind hums outside, and beneath it all, you can almost hear the steady rhythm of sleepers breathing in unison. It feels timeless, older than language. The act of sleeping together wasn't merely about endurance, it was about belonging. When the night stretched for 14 hours or more, this closeness became the measure of safety itself. Experts remain divided over whether dreams were interpreted differently when people slept together. Some suggest that shared dreams, whispered about in the morning, reinforced community bonds. Others think that the very act of waking side by side blurred the line between personal and collective experience. Whatever the truth, the memory of those nights lingers in the way we still associate warmth with companionship. You open your eyes again. The fire has burned low, painting the room in slow-moving red. The bed looks almost like a single creature, breathing softly, alive with the small motions of rest. It's hard not to feel something tender watching it, even across time. These were people who had little yet found comfort in each other's nearness, who turned scarcity into something that resembled peace. A lesser-known habit of the time was that before lying down, one person might recite a short charm or blessing to keep nightmares away. Some muttered it under their breath. Others spoke it aloud, so the children would feel protected. It was half prayer, half lullaby. The words varied from village to village, but the meaning was always the same. May the fire stay warm, may the dark stay kind. You look around the small room once more. The walls hold the echo of countless breaths, and the straw beds glow faintly in the last light. The cold beyond the door feels distant now, almost irrelevant. What matters is here the simple, quiet miracle of shared warmth. You can feel yourself begin to relax as if that ancient comfort has reached across the centuries. You are not alone. You are part of something human and enduring. The fire hums low, the straw rustles softly, and the old hut breathes around you, content. Outside, the night deepens until it feels endless. Inside, the hut breathes in slow, measured sounds. The crackle of wood, the sigh of the roof, the faint whisper of wind slipping through the thatch. You draw closer to the fire, the warmth wrapping around you like a living thing. Yet beneath the comfort you can sense it, the fear of the dark that haunted every medieval winter. It is widely recorded that people of the Middle Ages feared the night as much as the cold. When the sun sank, the world changed. Beyond the weak ring of firelight, stretched a landscape filled with spirits, wolves, and unseen dangers. The human imagination filled every shadow with threat. Without lamps or torches, the forest and fields vanished into a depth that even the bravest avoided. The darkness wasn't empty, it was alive. You listen closely and catch faint sounds outside, the kind that make your heart pause. A branch cracking under ice, a distant animal's cry. Perhaps just the wind, but the mind makes stories faster than reason. You think of the villagers lying on their straw beds, holding their breath, waiting to hear if the noise comes closer. They would have known that sound could mean hunger on four legs, prowling near the hut. A small but fascinating twist to this story is how sound became both warning and comfort. Dogs barking in the distance meant danger was near, but also that others were awake, that the community still watched. The silence that followed was worse. Silence meant the cold had swallowed everything. According to accounts from Northern Europe, people would sometimes hang small bells by their doors to catch movement outside. The faint ring would wake the lightest sleeper, though sometimes it was only the wind playing tricks. Some even scattered dried peas across the threshold, so that anything walking in the dark would rattle them, human or not. Such methods mixed practicality with superstition, a delicate balance born of fear and ingenuity. You lean your ear closer to the wall. The wood carries distant vibrations. It is strange to think that centuries ago, someone might have done exactly the same thing, listened for the living night and measured its threats. You can almost hear what they would have heard. Wolves calling to one another beyond the trees, the mournful rise and fall echoing through the cold air. An odd little belief once circulated that wolves weren't merely beasts but wandering souls, punished to roam the earth under moonlight. Children were told not to stare too long into the darkness, lest a lost spirit notice them. It sounds poetic now, but for those whose livestock or kin vanished into the night, such stories felt true. When nature rules without mercy, imagination becomes a way to make sense of fear. There's ongoing discussion among historians about how much of this fear was genuine terror and how much was cultural storytelling. Some argue that medieval people, accustomed to darkness, were less frightened than we imagine. Others insist that the isolation and lack of light amplified every sound, turning ordinary nights into trials of faith. The written records can only hint at what hearts felt in those long hours before dawn. You stand and walk toward the door. A faint draught seeps through, brushing against your skin like a cool whisper. The latch feels rough beneath your hand. You picture someone standing exactly here hundreds of winters ago, hand on that same spot, listening before unbolting it. The door creaks softly, and the wind pushes through with a sigh that smells of frost and pine. You peer outside. The night is a vast ocean of blue-black shadow. The snow glints faintly, reflecting the firelight spilling from the hut. Every sound seems magnified in the stillness. The faint groan of a branch, the soft movement of something unseen in the forest. It is both beautiful and menacing. You can see how such nights could give birth to entire worlds of legend. People once believed that certain nights were haunted more than others, especially in midwinter when the days were shortest. The longest night was thought to open a door between the living and the dead. Fires were kept burning until sunrise to keep wandering souls at bay. Some families left small offerings, bits of bread or ale outside their doors as a gesture of respect. a small price to pay for peace. You step back and close the door gently. The warmth hits you like a soft wave, and the air inside feels suddenly safer. The firelight dances again, making the shadows shift across the walls like familiar ghosts. You sit down, your back against the timber, and let the flicker soothe you. A lesser-known habit of winter nights was the telling of stories just before sleep. These tales mixed faith, humor, and fear in equal parts. They were passed down generation to generation, shaping how people understood the world. Each story taught something practical. Don't wander far, respect the forest, keep the fire alive but wrapped it in mystery so the children would remember. You can imagine it, a circle of tired faces glowing orange in the firelight, the storyteller's voice slow and low, rising only when the tale reached its dark twist. A log crackles loudly, and the listeners jump, then laughter, quiet and relieved. Storytelling wasn't just entertainment, it was a way to tame the night. By naming their fears, people gave them shape, and by shaping them, they took away their power. The hut around you feels warmer now, calmer. The sounds outside have softened, or perhaps your mind has learned their rhythm. You start to see why these nights weren't all dread. There was beauty too, the intimacy of shared light, the music of wood and flame, the quiet understanding that each dawn was a victory. Experts remain divided over whether medieval people truly felt isolated or connected during these endless nights. Some say their faith made them fearless, others that they clung to superstition because fear was constant. Maybe both were true. What matters is the image that remains. People sitting together in the dim glow, wrapped in fur and trust, while the dark world watched from beyond the walls. You lie back, your head resting near the hearth's edge. The warmth hums through the floor, and the cold settles quietly outside. The wind keeps singing, but now it sounds almost kind, like an old friend reminding you to stay near the fire. The night might be long, but you are no longer afraid of it. You listen, breathe, and let the story of the darkness lull you towards sleep. The fire's glow softens to a low red shimmer, and the hut drifts towards silence. Only the wind outside keeps its slow rhythm, brushing snow against the wooden walls. You pull a rough wool blanket tighter around your shoulders and notice how the fibers scratch gently against your skin. Comfort was never smooth in these winters, but it was sincere. Tonight, you begin to think about what people wore to bed when the cold became unbearable. It is widely recorded that medieval people did not have night clothes as we imagine them. Sleepwear was an extension of daily wear, chosen for practicality rather than luxury. Most slept in long linen shirts or shifts that doubled as undergarments during the day. The fabric was coarse by modern standards, but breathable and easy to wash. Wool was far too precious to waste on clothes, meant only for sleep. For many, the same shirt carried them through both waking and dreaming. You hold out a fold of the blanket, its edges rough and uneven, the threads slightly knotted from hand spinning. You can almost picture a woman by the fire, spinning wool into yarn during the short daylight hours, her fingers red from cold but steady with habit. Every garment was made to last, patched again and again, until the fabric became a map of endurance. An unusual superstition cropped up around clothing at night. Some people believed that sleeping unclothed invited spirits to touch your skin, while others thought the opposite, that too many layers trapped nightmares inside. It was a delicate balance, and every village had its own opinion. You can imagine the quiet debates between neighbors, one swearing by an extra tunic, another insisting bare skin meant a purer rest. In the end, survival usually won over theory. The air near the floor grows colder, and you can feel how the warmth rises in layers. Those closest to the fire would have slept in thinner shirts. Those near the walls wrapped themselves in everything they owned. It was common for people to wear hats or hoods to bed, not for fashion but for simple physics. Much of a person's heat escapes through the head, and the medieval world understood this without needing a thermometer. According to common practice in medieval Europe, even the poorest villagers often owned at least one wool cap. It might be shared among family members or passed down like an heirloom. Children wore old stockings on their heads when caps ran out. In some places, people tied scarves around their necks and shoulders to seal in warmth, forming makeshift cocoons against the night. You run your fingers along the hem of your imagined tunic. It feels thick in the mind's eye, heavy with the faint scent of smoke. Everything in this world smells faintly of the hearth because the fire never stopped. Clothes absorb that scent, turning warmth into memory. A person's garments told their story, how many winters they'd survived, how many times they'd mended rather than replaced. A curious detail often overlooked is that linen shirts were sometimes scented with herbs before sleep. Housewives sprinkled lavender, sage, or pennyroyal between layers of folded cloth, not for romance but for hygiene. These herbs deterred insects and added a trace of freshness that made the long months of smoke and sweat more bearable. The smell of dried lavender in winter must have felt like a secret promise of spring. You shift and pull the blanket closer. Its weight feels reassuring, grounding you in the dim glow of the fire. Beneath it, you sense the faint prickle of rough fabric against your arms. It's easy to imagine yourself lying there centuries ago, wearing the same kind of linen shift, hoping the small fire would last until dawn. Some researchers question if medieval people truly changed into nightclothes at all. There are accounts of workers falling asleep fully dressed, boots and all, after a long day in the fields. Removing clothes meant exposing the skin to cold air, a risk few would take when frost crept through the cracks. It wasn't laziness, it was instinct. You guarded heat like treasure. You glance toward the wall where a few garments hang from wooden pegs. A cloak, a pair of worn breeches, a hood stiff with age. They sway gently in the draught, whispering of days spent in snow and rain. In the dim light, they almost look like silent companions, watching over the sleepers. Locals even whispered a strange belief that spirits could hide in empty clothes. To prevent this, some people tucked their garments beneath their beds or folded them neatly before sleep. A messy pile invited mischief, they said. Whether it was about order or unseen guests, no one wanted to take the chance. You smile at the thought of someone carefully folding their tunic before lying down on a straw bed, all while believing that neatness might guard their soul. The fire pops softly, and the room fills with a warm, smoky rhythm. The smell of wool mingles with the sweetness of drying herbs. You picture the air heavy with that blend of scent, faint crackle of embers, the soft sigh of breath under thick blankets. Sleep wasn't about ease, but about surrender. It meant trusting that the fire would hold and the cold would not find you. There's ongoing discussion among historians about how people managed the washing of their clothes in winter. Water froze, soap was scarce, and yet cleanliness mattered for survival. Some accounts mention snow used as a natural scrubber, others describe smoke fumigation to kill lice. It wasn't glamorous, but it was effective. Necessity, as always, turned hardship into wisdom. You lean back and imagine the soft murmur of a family preparing for bed. The mother adjusts the blanket. The father stretches out near the fire, still wearing his tunic. A child curls under a cloak that smells faintly of sheep. Outside, the snow falls thicker, muting every sound. The world shrinks to this small circle of warmth and breath. You close your eyes and feel the layers of fabric around you, the ghost of warmth from a long-vanished hearth. Every thread carries history. The rough linen, the woolen cap, the worn blanket, they are the armor of ordinary people who faced winter with patience and hope. You imagine drifting to sleep among them, wrapped in the hum of the fire and the faint scent of herbs. When you open your eyes again, the hut feels smaller, quieter, but no less alive. Every object, every layer of fabric, speaks of care. They lived close to the cold, but even closer to one another, trusting that shared heat and humble cloth would be enough. The fire sighs and shifts, sending a trail of sparks upward into the dark hollow of the roof. You lie still and watch them rise, their glow reflecting faintly in the air before they vanish. The warmth settles softly across the room, folding everyone quiet stillness. Your thoughts begin to wander toward what happens behind closed eyes, toward the strange world of medieval dreams. It is widely recorded that sleep, in the Middle Ages, was not only rest but a passage into meaning. Dreams carried weight, sometimes more than waking life. They were treated as messages, gifts, or warnings from forces unseen. Even ordinary farmers believed that what they saw in their sleep could shape the next day. Dreams were the language of the divine, or perhaps of something older than faith. You can imagine lying here in the half-light, wrapped in blankets, eyes closed but mind still alive. The crackle of the fire turns rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. In that rhythm, thoughts become images. The hut's smoke becomes clouds. The sound of wind becomes a whispering voice. Someone dreaming might see their field in bloom or their ancestors walking through snow. These were not random scenes. They were believed to hold prophecy. An odd little practice existed among some villagers, placing a sprig of rosemary or thyme under the pillow to invite good dreams. Others preferred a small piece of bread, blessed by the parish priest. If you dreamt of water, it meant change. If of fire, danger. If of bread, prosperity. Dreams were a nightly conversation with mystery, and everyone had an opinion on what the answers meant. There is ongoing debate among historians about whether these beliefs came from Christian teachings or older pagan roots. Some argue that priests tried to redefine dreams as moral lessons, while others say villagers quietly kept their ancestral interpretations. Perhaps both are true, overlapping like the smoke and the stars outside. You turn slightly, the straw beneath you rustling softly. Imagine waking in the darkness, the fire low, your mind still full of images. Maybe you dreamed of a lost friend, or a wolf that spoke in a human voice, or a road you'd never seen before. You would sit up, whisper a prayer, and wonder what it meant. Dreams were both blessing and burden. The more vivid they were, the heavier they felt. Surviving records reveal that dream books circulated among literate clergy and merchants. These books listed hundreds of symbols and their meanings. To dream of teeth falling out was a sign of coming loss. To dream of flying was a sign of spiritual grace. To dream of snow meant purity, though too much of it meant hardship. Few peasants could read, but the ideas spread through talk and story, passed from mouth to mouth like recipes for the soul. A curious detail often overlooked is how connected dreams were to the body. People believed that what you ate before bed influenced what you saw. Heavy meat caused restless sleep, while milk and honey brought calm visions. Some even claimed that eating cheese could summon strange or mischievous dreams, a superstition that still lingers quietly in certain corners of Europe. You imagine the family you've been visiting in your mind. Perhaps a mother murmurs a short prayer before sleeping, asking to see the Virgin in her dreams. The father, tired from work, closes his eyes and sees the field thawing, a promise of spring. The child dreams of animals talking, of stars falling, of things too bright to name. When morning comes, they might share what they saw, half afraid, half amused. Folklore hints at another idea, that dreams were journeys of the soul. While the body slept, the spirit wandered through invisible landscapes. If the rooster crowed before the soul returned, it might be trapped outside, leaving the dreamer listless for days. This belief made the timing of sleep sacred. People preferred to wake gently, not startled, to give their spirits time to come home. You stretch slightly, the blanket brushing against your face. It is easy to see how the quiet and the flicker of light could pull a person inward. In this world without electric glow, night was vast and deep, and imagination had space to breathe. The fire's pulse became the heartbeat of thought. According to notes from monastic chronicles, even learned men treated dreams with respect. They recorded visions in careful Latin, trying to separate divine revelation from deceit. Yet no matter how carefully they reasoned, mystery always slipped through their fingers. To dream was to stand on the threshold of the unknown, a space both feared and cherished. An unusual superstition persisted in parts of France and England. If you woke from a nightmare, you were told to spit into the fire and whisper the dream's name aloud, so it would burn away before sunrise. To forget a dream was dangerous. To name it was to reclaim your peace. You can almost see the gesture. Someone sitting upright in the smoky dark, murmuring softly to the embers until calm returned. You lie still again, the sound of the hut folding around you. The walls creak, the wind shifts. Somewhere far off, a dog barks once and falls silent. You think of how many centuries people have slept like this, beneath roofs that leaked, beside fires that smoked, trusting that their dreams might carry them safely through the night. A lesser-known habit of some sleepers was to turn their faces toward the east before drifting off. East was the direction of the rising sun, and by aligning with it, they believed they would rise renewed. It was a small act of faith in the certainty of morning, a quiet defiance against endless darkness. You close your eyes and imagine that alignment, the warmth of the fire to your left, the whisper of the dawn somewhere beyond the wall. Your breathing slows to match the rhythm of the hut. Dreams are waiting. The ancient night listens, and in that stillness, the past feels close enough to touch. Somewhere in the darkness, the fire sighs and drops a log. The faint pop stirs you from a half-dream, and for a moment you are caught between worlds. The hut is dim and quiet, yet not silent. Someone nearby shifts under blankets, and the rustle of straw follows. You blink at the ceiling and realize that only a few hours have passed. The night is far from over. You are awake during what medieval people called the first sleep. It is widely recorded that before the rise of artificial light, people slept in two distinct phases. The first began soon after dusk and lasted for a few hours, until sometime past midnight. Then came a period of quiet wakefulness, often lasting an hour or more, followed by the second sleep until dawn. This pattern was as natural as breathing. The body followed darkness as faithfully as tides follow the moon. You sit up slightly, the wool blanket falling from your shoulders. The fire has burned low, glowing like a bed of jewels. The air tastes of smoke and iron. Around you, the rest of the family stirs softly. One child mutters a few nonsense words in sleep. The mother opens her eyes, yawns, and adds a piece of wood to the hearth. The glow brightens just enough to reveal tired faces and small smiles. An odd little custom persisted during these hours. People would rise quietly to tend the fire, relieve themselves outside, or even pray. Some took the chance to talk in whispers, to share thoughts that daylight did not allow. It was a pause between worlds, a pocket of calm where work and rest touched hands. A traveller might use the time to mend clothing by firelight. A mother might nurse her baby. In those moments, time felt both endless and tender. There's ongoing discussion among historians about why this segmented sleep pattern faded. Some argue that artificial lighting reshaped our inner clocks, compressing rest into one block. Others suggest that industrial schedules made two sleeps impractical. Whatever the cause, the shift was permanent. Yet as you sit here watching the coals glow, it feels easy to understand how natural that rhythm once was. Night was long, and sleep could afford to wander. You rise and step carefully across the straw. The ground feels cool underfoot, a quiet reminder of the world's patience. You pour a little water from a clay jug into a wooden cup and drink. The taste is faintly smoky, drawn from a bucket that stood too near the hearth. You take another sip anyway. The cold steadies you. According to parish writings from the 15th century, this waking period was sometimes called the watch. It was not a time of fear, but of reflection. Many people prayed or recited psalms, believing the hours after midnight were closer to heaven. Some couples used the quiet to talk about plans or whisper affection before sleep returned. In winter, when days were short and labor demanding, this middle-of-the-night peace was a rare gift. You glance at the fire again. The mother beside it rubs her hands and adds another stick. The faint crackle seems louder now that everything else is still. She lifts a small pot from beside the hearth, pours its contents into a cup, and takes a sip. The smell of ale fills the air, warm and sweet. It was common to keep a small drink near the fire for these hours, something mild to soothe the body back to rest. In some homes, it might be thin wine or spiced milk. A curious detail often overlooked is that these midnight meals, humble as they were, had ritual importance. Sharing food in the dark was a gesture of connection, a quiet reaffirmation of life. Families might pass the cup around, each taking a sip before lying down again. It sounds small, but in the silence of winter, such acts mattered. They reminded everyone that they were not alone, that warmth and company still existed in the heart of the cold. Outside, the wind shifts direction. The roof sighs, shedding a little snow. You hear a faraway owl call once, then fade into stillness. For a moment, the entire world seems to hold its breath. You sit back down near the fire, the cup warm in your hand, and stare into the embers. Their red glow pulses softly, each spark a heartbeat of time. An unusual superstition lingered around these hours of wakefulness. People said that spirits walked the land most freely then, especially in the deep of winter. If you were awake, you might catch a glimpse of one passing by your door. To keep them at bay, some families kept the fire alive. Others whispered a few lines of prayer before dozing again. Even so, many claimed the stillness of this hour felt holy, not haunted. You lean your head against the wall and watch as the fire slowly revives itself. The coals shift, glow, and fall into new shapes. It's strange how alive a hearth can seem, how it mirrors your own breath. Your eyelids grow heavy again. Around you, the family resettles under their blankets. The mother hums quietly, a sound too low to name but enough to comfort. It is said in old tales that dreams after the first waking were gentler, closer to morning light. To dream then was to glimpse renewal, to touch the edge of dawn before it came. The people of the past might not have known why their bodies stirred, but they trusted the rhythm. They lived by moon and fire, by hunger and rest, by simple truths that needed no explanation. You lie down again, the straw whispering beneath you. The fire's glow washes over your face. Beyond the door, the wind keeps its soft song. Your breath slows, the warmth wraps around you, and the hut slips once more into its shared slumber. In this middle stretch of night, you feel both awake and dreaming, held gently between two worlds, waiting for the second sleep to find you. When you open your eyes again, the fire has shifted from red to gold. Someone must have tended it while you drifted in that gentle half-sleep. The glow wavers softly, painting the inside of the hut in trembling shades of amber. The air feels thicker now, full of that smoky warmth that clings to everything it touches. You sit up slowly, watching how the flicker plays against the walls, how the light seems alive and curious. According to old household accounts, candles were rare in poorer homes. Firelight did almost all the work. Candles, when they appeared, were made from tallow, smoky and uneven, their flames dim but steady. Only churches and noble halls could afford beeswax, which burned clean and sweet. In this hut, light came from the hearth, and every shimmer mattered. The flames told time, mood, and even emotion. They were part of the night itself. You stare at the nearest wall, where the flickering light turns cracks into rivers and shadows into shapes. It feels as though the hut is breathing with you, exhaling gold and drawing in darkness. For a moment, you imagine what it must have been like to live every evening this way, with shadows for company. The light feels fragile but enchanting, enough to make ordinary things look almost holy. An odd little practice once found in some villages involved reading the fire's movements as signs. If the flames leaned east, travelers would arrive. If they hissed loudly, bad weather was coming. The hearth was an oracle, its dance a language known only to those who stared long enough. You smile at the thought of families whispering predictions over a crackling log, half believing, half jesting, the warmth binding them together. There's ongoing discussion among scholars about how deeply symbolic light was in medieval daily life. Some argue it carried purely practical importance, while others see it as spiritual. In a world of darkness, illumination had meaning beyond utility. The faintest candle could be a metaphor for faith, for knowledge, for life itself. To sit in light was to remember hope. You lean closer to the fire and feel the heat trace across your face. It hums softly, as if aware of your gaze. The shapes it throws on the wall shift with every breath of air. A curl of smoke catches in the rafters, spreading into a slow-moving cloud that glows and fades. The smell of pine resin and scorched wood mixes with the lingering scent of wool. It's intoxicating in its simplicity. It is widely recorded that people often used firelight to tell stories before sleeping. Each flicker painted its own theatre on the walls, and children would watch as if the shadows themselves performed. A mother might tell a tale about saints or lost travelers, while the flames acted it out in wavering silhouettes. The light danced, the words flowed, and for a moment, imagination replaced hunger and cold. You notice how the flames change shape when someone moves near them. A child stirs under the blankets, and the light jumps higher, spilling across the straw floor. Every movement in the hut seems connected to it, like the room and the fire share a pulse. Perhaps that is why people saw their hearth as something alive. It listened, it responded, it remembered. A curious detail often forgotten is that many families used soot and candle smoke to mark time or count events. They drew lines or crosses on the walls with blackened sticks, recording births, deaths, and seasons. The walls became diaries of flame and ash, a visual memory that faded slowly with each new year. You glance at the timbers here, and think you can almost see faint marks beneath the soot, long rubbed away but still whispering from the past. The light shifts again. You notice how it stretches and contracts as the logs burn down. In that rhythm, you find calm. Firelight has a way of measuring thought, of slowing everything around it. You begin to understand why people watched it endlessly, why their prayers and their dreams were always drawn to the flame. According to travelers' letters from the 14th century, a well-tended fire was a source of pride. A steady glow meant the household was strong, diligent, blessed. Letting the fire die was almost a moral failure. To visitors, a dim hearth spoke of neglect. To the hosts, a bright one was a silent welcome. The quality of your flame was your reputation. An unusual superstition floated through certain valleys. If a candle's flame bent suddenly towards someone in the room, it meant that person would soon travel far. If the flame crackled 3 times in quick succession, a letter or message was on its way. No one agreed why these signs mattered, but they gave the long nights a sense of meaning, a way to read fate in the language of light. You sit still and let the glow wash over you. It moves gently across your hands, your face, your clothes. It makes everything softer, forgiving. The hut that looked worn and smoky in daylight now feels sacred. Even the cracks in the walls seem purposeful, like veins in old skin. The flicker of light turns imperfection into beauty. Folklore hints at another practice, the shadow play. On feast nights or long midwinter evenings, villagers would hold their hands in front of the fire to cast figures on the wall, birds, animals, faces, and weave stories around them. The game was simple, but the laughter it brought filled the hut with warmth deeper than heat. Children would giggle, adults would smile, and for a few moments, hardship gave way to wonder. You close your eyes and see that glow behind your eyelids, red and gold swirling together. The warmth on your skin feels steady now. Somewhere behind you, someone sighs contentedly in their sleep. The fire pops again, sending a spark upward, a brief star vanishing into darkness. Experts remain divided over whether these quiet hours before the second sleep were the most peaceful of all. Some say they were times of reflection, others of communion. Whatever the truth, the feeling remains this balance of light and dark, of warmth and silence. It is the heartbeat of winter itself, repeating endlessly through the centuries. You rest your head on your arm and watch the light dance for a little longer. It bends, wavers, then steadies again. The story of flame is simple but infinite. To burn, to fade, to begin again. Your breathing slows to match its rhythm, and soon you are adrift once more in the warm current of the night. The air in the hut grows still. The fire has sunk low again, and only faint embers remain, glowing softly like the last heartbeat of warmth. The silence feels heavy, the kind that makes your ears ring. You sit up and sense how thick the cold has become. It presses against the walls, wraps around the hut, tries to creep through every gap. This is the hour when even the bravest felt the weight of winter most keenly. Evidence from the period shows that in the deepest parts of winter, temperatures inside wooden huts could drop dangerously close to freezing once the fire died. The walls, no matter how carefully packed with moss or clay, could not keep out the chill forever. Families survived through layers, movement, and sheer endurance. The cold was not a visitor, but a companion. You can feel that now in your breath, which clouds faintly in the air before fading into the dark. You pull the blanket closer and listen. Every sound carries differently in the cold. The faintest creak of wood echoes like a groan, and the drip of melting frost feels deliberate, slow. The world has shrunk to this one fragile space of life in a sea of ice. It is humbling. An odd little detail appears in some written chronicles. People would sometimes sleep with heated stones wrapped in cloth tucked at their feet. These bed warmers were not the polished brass tools of later centuries, but simple river stones, taken from the hearth and cooled just enough to hold without burning. When placed beneath the blankets, they radiated heat for hours. Tiny suns against the frozen dark. You imagine holding such a stone, its surface rough but pulsing with warmth, the smell of smoke still clinging to it. You would nestle it beneath your feet, close your eyes, and feel the heat soak slowly upward. For a while, it would feel like protection, a secret weapon against the cold. When the warmth faded, you would reach for another from the edge of the fire and repeat the ritual, half asleep, half awake. Some researchers question how effective these small methods were. Could a few warm stones and a wool blanket really fight back against nights that froze rivers solid? Debate remains unresolved, though archaeology and common sense suggest that even small heat sources could make the difference between endurance and illness. The medieval body adapted in ways the modern one has forgotten. You look toward the wall where frost has crept through the cracks in thin white veins. The air smells different now, sharper, like metal and snow. The timbers pop occasionally, expanding and contracting in the shifting temperature. You imagine families listening to the same sounds, waiting for dawn, whispering to each other to stay awake a little longer. Sleep was rest, but it was also risk. If the fire died and the body slipped too deep into dreaming, the cold might win. According to old folk sayings, the coldest hours were ruled by silence itself. People spoke little then, afraid their voices might break the stillness and invite misfortune. In some regions they called it the wolf's hour, not only for the predators outside, but for the way the mind began to turn inward, hunting its own thoughts. Loneliness felt thicker at that time. You close your eyes and listen for what they might have heard. The faint whistle of wind through the roof hole, the soft hiss of dying coals, the gentle snore of someone lost to sleep. Beyond that, nothing. It is a silence so deep that it almost hums. It is both eerie and peaceful, the sound of a world resting under its own weight. A curious detail often overlooked is that frost did not only cling to the outside. In the coldest huts, ice formed on the inside of walls, even on the edges of blankets. People would wake to find their breath frozen in tiny crystals on the wood beside them. Some described it as beautiful, a fragile lace made by the night. Others saw it as a reminder of mortality, a decoration placed there by winter's hand. You shift closer to the hearth, hoping for one last trace of heat. The coals glow faintly, their edges white, their centers red. You blow on them, and for a moment the light brightens, the warmth returns. You can see how many generations must have done the same gesture. Breathe life into flame, the oldest prayer in the world. There's ongoing discussion among historians about how people managed to maintain health in such cold. Records show a surprising resilience. Diets rich in fat and ale provided some insulation, while layered clothing and constant movement kept circulation alive. They accepted discomfort as the price of life, not as a tragedy, but as a teacher. Folklore hints at another belief. It was said that the spirit of winter wandered the land in the shape of a pale woman, her breath, the frost on the windows. If she entered your home, she left patterns of ice on the walls as her mark. To keep her out, families burned herbs like juniper and thyme, their fragrant smoke curling through the hut. Whether this was ritual or imagination, the scent still lingers in the stories. You lean back, watching the breath leave your mouth in faint clouds. It feels almost alive, as if your body is making ghosts. Outside, the night presses harder. The walls tremble softly. Somewhere far off, the wind changes tone, lifting and falling like a distant hymn. It is widely recorded that in the far north, people learned to read these wind songs like language. A rising howl meant new snow. A low hum meant ice thickening on rivers. The villagers would listen before sleeping, deciding if they would hunt or stay inside come morning. Nature spoke clearly to those who lived close enough to hear it. You pull the blanket over your head for a moment and breathe in the trapped warmth. The smell of wool and smoke is grounding, almost sweet. Your heartbeat slows, matching the rhythm of the cooling fire. The cold presses closer, but you no longer fight it. You understand what the people here once knew. Cold is not the enemy, only a reminder of how precious warmth truly is. The frost creeps higher on the wall, the coals dim, and yet, as you lie there in the quiet glow, you feel a strange calm. The night is vast, the cold relentless, but you are small and steady, another soul wrapped in the same long story of endurance. Somewhere beyond the dark, dawn waits patiently, and for now, that is enough. The first light of dawn is still hours away, but something stirs in the shadows. You hear a faint scratching sound from the corner of the hut. It is subtle at first, like a dry whisper. Then it grows into a small rustle beneath the straw. You sit up slowly, realizing what the noise must be. Not spirits, not wind, but the small companions of every medieval sleeper. Surviving records reveal that huts like this were never entirely private. The warmth that drew families together also drew everything else seeking shelter. Mice, beetles, fleas, even the occasional snake during milder months. It sounds dreadful now, but people accepted these visitors as part of life. In winter, the struggle for warmth belonged to all living things. The hut was a shared fortress of survival. You lift a corner of the blanket and peer toward the straw mattress. A small movement ripples through it, and you imagine the tickle of tiny legs running just beneath the surface. The straw crackles softly, releasing a faint scent of dried earth. It feels oddly intimate, as if the very floor breathes alongside you. An odd little custom persisted in some regions to cope with this quiet invasion. People sprinkled herbs such as tansy, mint, or wormwood into the bedding to discourage insects. These plants gave off strong odors that pests disliked. The fragrance must have filled the room, blending with the scent of smoke and wool until it became the perfume of the season itself. In some places, they even rubbed garlic along the floorboards or burned juniper twigs to drive the smallest creatures away. According to household guides from the 15th century, the most determined offenders were bedbugs and fleas. They hid in the seams of blankets and the cracks of wooden boards. Even the rich, with their feather beds and curtains, were not immune. It is said that King Henry IV once blamed a restless night on the bite of invisible armies, You smile at that. Even kings had to scratch sometimes. There's ongoing discussion among medical historians about how medieval people understood cleanliness. Soap existed but was costly, and water in winter was too cold to waste on full washing. Instead, they relied on dry methods: brushing, scraping, and perfuming. Ash mixed with vinegar served as an early disinfectant, while sand or ground herbs were used to polish skin and hair. These makeshift routines kept sickness at bay more effectively than one might expect. You shift slightly on your straw bed, trying to imagine living in such intimacy with the earth. Every sound, every scent, every movement connects to survival. Even the small creatures scuttling in the dark are reminders that warmth and life are never solitary. Perhaps that is why medieval people rarely feared them. To share space with pests was not a failure, but proof that warmth existed to be found. A curious detail often forgotten is how certain insects played unexpected roles in daily life. Fireflies caught in small jars served as natural nightlights in warmer months. Beeswax, taken from hives, became candles that outlasted winter. Even lice were believed to carry the sins of humanity, and removing them was seen as a symbolic cleansing. It is strange, and yet it fits the worldview of an age that found meaning in every living thing. You lie back again, wrapping the blanket tighter. The scratching has stopped. Perhaps the tiny guests have settled or fled the heat of the fire. The air feels heavy with sleep again, thick and still. You breathe in, smelling straw, smoke, and a faint hint of mint that someone long ago might have sprinkled here. Folklore hints at another odd belief, that restless spirits disguised themselves as mice or insects to test a household's kindness. If you killed them cruelly, misfortune would follow. If you gently brushed them outside, blessings would return with the morning. Whether anyone truly believed it, or simply found comfort in the story, it added a strange tenderness to the act of enduring discomfort. It is widely recorded that some families lined their bedding with linen sheets when they could afford them, to create a smoother surface between skin and straw. The fabric acted as both barrier and luxury. A clean sheet was a sign of pride and good order, a rare comfort saved for feast days or guests. Even a single piece of soft cloth could transform a hard winter bed into something almost civilized. You reach down and feel the rough straw under your fingertips. Its texture scratches but also grounds you. The more you touch it, the less unpleasant it feels. There is a rhythm to it, the same rhythm that runs through everything here. Endure, adapt, rest. The hut creaks again as wind brushes its sides. You think of how many centuries passed with the same sounds, the same rustles, the same persistence. Some researchers question whether medieval people truly slept deeply in such conditions. With insects, noise, and cold, uninterrupted rest must have been rare. Yet accounts describe people waking refreshed, rising before dawn to begin work without complaint. The body learned the language of its world, tuning itself to roughness, to the whisper of straw, and the hum of small lives beside it. An unusual superstition surrounded the morning's first bite from a flea. If it drew blood on a feast day, it was taken as a sign of good luck. Pain meant life, warmth, and movement, proof that winter had not yet claimed its hold. Such small optimism reveals the stubborn resilience of the time. Even an itch could become a reason to smile. You roll onto your side and let your gaze rest on the fading glow of the coals. The hut is still. The faint hiss of the wind has softened. The straw under you has warmed with your body. You can almost imagine that even the insects have stopped moving, lulled by the same heat and rhythm. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you understand the strange peace of this world. Life, in all its mess and movement, shares the same fragile shelter. Every sound becomes part of a single, quiet song. The warmth holds, the night endures, and the sleepers drift deeper into dreams that belong to no one and everyone at once. The faint hum of the night fades into a deeper stillness. You stir beneath the blanket, stretching slightly, feeling the lingering warmth from the fire and the soft resistance of the straw beneath you. In this silence, Another rhythm begins to surface, the rhythm of human closeness. You turn your head and glimpse the slow movement of others sleeping beside you, wrapped together beneath layers of wool and hide. It is widely recorded that in medieval homes, space was a luxury. Most huts had only a single room, sometimes two if fortune allowed. There were no walls to separate living from sleeping, no doors to close for privacy. Within that small world of wood and smoke, every sound and every breath belonged to everyone. Families, couples, travelers, and even animals shared the same air, the same warmth, and sometimes the same bed. You look at the dim glow of the fire and imagine the scene more clearly. The mother turns in her sleep, her hand brushing her husband's shoulder. A child, half buried under a blanket, curls closer. Even in sleep, bodies learn to find one another, to fit like puzzle pieces against the cold. Intimacy was not a choice, it was survival. A curious detail often forgotten is how this closeness shaped relationships. In a world where privacy barely existed, tenderness found small ways to express itself: an exchanged glance, a shared cup, a whispered story after dark. For many couples, the quiet hours before dawn were the only time they could speak softly without interruption. Love, like warmth, was maintained through patience and rhythm. Some researchers question whether affection in these small huts was more practical than passionate. Yet evidence from letters, songs, and poems paints a different picture. Even the humblest people wrote of longing, devotion, and tenderness, often comparing love to the comfort of a fire or the strength of a wooden roof. They knew that intimacy could exist without space, that connection could bloom in the narrowest corners. You can almost hear their quiet laughter, see the way hands brushed together as they rearranged blankets. A small touch meant more than a grand gesture. To share a bed was to share breath and trust. When the cold was fierce enough to numb fingers and crack lips, human warmth became its own kind of light. An odd little practice appears in folklore. Some couples slept back to back to trap heat between them, a position that came to symbolize both partnership and independence. The saying went that a good marriage is like winter sleep, close enough for warmth, but with room to breathe. You smile at the wisdom that, the practical poetry of ordinary life. According to surviving household notes, newlyweds were often given wool blankets or furs as wedding gifts, not silver or gold. The idea was simple: love needed warmth to last. Some communities even had blessings for the marital bed, short prayers whispered over the linens to ensure harmony. It might sound quaint now, but for people whose lives revolved around shared comfort, such rituals felt sacred. The air in the hut shifts slightly, and you sense movement again. The father rises quietly, adjusting the blanket over his children before returning to his place. The gesture is small but profound, a reminder that care was measured not in words but in deeds. When you live within inches of one another, kindness becomes part of breathing. There's ongoing discussion among cultural historians about how people balanced modesty and intimacy in such settings. Church records suggest constant tension between moral teachings and practical needs. Sleeping together was normal, but public displays of affection were discouraged. The hut became both a confessional and a sanctuary, a space where love existed, unspoken yet understood. You stretch out your legs and imagine the feeling of shared warmth spreading through the bed. It is soft and steady, the warmth of trust more than of fire. You can almost feel the heartbeat of the hut itself each breath, a reminder that togetherness was their strongest defense. A lesser-known habit among villagers was the morning promise. Before leaving bed at dawn, couples would exchange a few quiet words, simple wishes for luck, safety, or good weather. It was not ceremony but gratitude. They had survived another night together, and in the deep of winter, that was something worth acknowledging. Folklore hints at another gentle belief. If two people slept so closely that their breath mingled in the cold, their souls were said to become intertwined, never to part entirely even after death. Perhaps this was comfort for the living, or perhaps it was something deeper, a recognition that warmth, once shared, lingers beyond the body. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining what that closeness might have felt like. The roughness of wool, the faint smell of smoke in someone's hair, the quiet of a world without machines or clocks. In such stillness, love becomes elemental, stripped to its core. The fire flutters softly, and shadows move across the walls. You open your eyes again to see them dancing, two shapes leaning together, one small shape nestled between. You know it is only the light playing tricks, yet it feels like a memory you have stepped into. It is widely recorded that the human heart beats slower in cold weather, but warmth shared between bodies restores it, deepens it. You think of that rhythm now, of how countless generations found rest not in solitude but in togetherness. The hut may be small, the night may be long, but within it beats something vast and enduring. You settle again beneath the blanket, the straw sighing beneath you. Around you, the soft sounds of breathing fill the air. The warmth presses close, the darkness folds in, and for a little while, everything feels complete. The night outside grows pale, though the sun has not yet risen. A faint silver light slips through the small window, mingling with the last glow of the coals. You breathe in and taste the air, sharp, cold, and faintly sweet with the smell of frost. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster calls once, and the sound seems to tremble through the frozen world. The village, still half asleep, begins to stir beneath its blanket of snow. It is widely recorded that medieval villages in winter moved as one body. When night fell, every hut sank into silence at roughly the same time. When morning approached, the same quiet awakening rippled through the fields. No one needed a clock. The smoke rising from a neighbor's chimney was signal enough that the day had begun. You step outside the hut, wrapping your blanket around your shoulders. The air cuts like glass, clear and perfect. Snow crunches underfoot, its surface hard and glittering. The horizon blushes faintly pink, the first promise of dawn. The world looks untouched, as if every sound and breath has been buried under white. The roofs of nearby huts sag gently with the weight of the night's fall, and thin streams of smoke begin to curl into the sky. A curious detail often overlooked is how sound changes after snow. In the medieval countryside, deep snow turned the world silent in a way few of us ever hear now. Hooves, footsteps, even voices were muted, swallowed by the frozen air. Villagers said that in such stillness, you could hear your own thoughts as clearly as a bell. It was a kind of quiet that felt sacred. You look back at the hut. The door stands slightly ajar, releasing a faint wisp of warm smoke. Inside, the family still sleeps, gathered together like embers waiting to be stirred. For a moment, you simply watch, understanding how fragile and beautiful that small shelter is. Surviving through the winter was not a guarantee. Every hut that still smoked at dawn was a small victory. According to parish writings from the 13th century, entire communities measured their well-being by the color of their morning smoke. A pale grey meant the fire was strong and the family safe. No smoke meant trouble or loss. Neighbors would walk from house to house, checking chimneys before tending to their own chores. Solidarity was not a virtue to preach, but a necessity to live. You walk further into the snow. The cold bites through the soles of your feet, even through thick wool. The village road is nothing more than two shallow trenches carved by cartwheels now filled with ice. To your left, you see a small cluster of trees bending under frost. To your right, a line of low fences almost buried in drifts. Each hut looks nearly identical, small mounds of thatch and wood crouching together for warmth. An odd little custom appeared during these frozen mornings. Before beginning their chores, villagers would listen to the air to decide whether to speak. If the cold was too deep, breath hung thick, and speech came out like fog, and they believed that wasting words in such air could steal strength from the body. So people worked silently until the sun cleared the frost, moving through the dawn as if inside a dream. You stop near a frozen well and brush snow from its edge. The rope is stiff, the bucket frozen to the rim. Someone will come soon to chip the ice with a hammer to break through to the black water below. That water, shockingly cold, will steam as it hits the air. It is the first sound of the new day. There is ongoing discussion among environmental historians about how medieval people perceived winter landscapes. Some describe them as cruel and barren, while others believe they saw beauty in survival itself. The truth may lie between the two. To live with the cold was to respect it, to understand that beauty could exist in harshness, just as warmth could hide inside frost. You return toward the hut, noticing small footprints by the doorway. The family's dog, perhaps, or a goat that spent the night close for warmth. Animals were part of the household too, their bodies adding a few degrees of heat to the air. The smell might have been strong, but the comfort outweighed it. You picture a cow breathing softly in the corner, her breath fogging in rhythm with the fire's smoke. It is widely recorded that during the hardest winters, villagers sometimes built earthen banks around their huts to trap heat. Snow itself became insulation, packed against the walls to seal gaps. What we might call desolation, they saw as opportunity. Even nature's cruelty could be turned into protection. A small but fascinating twist to this story is that children often loved these mornings most. Once the chores were done, they played in the snow, carving tunnels, throwing handfuls of frost at one another, shaping small figures from ice. Their laughter, historians note, carried far in the still air, a rare music amid months of hardship. Childhood found joy even when the world slept under ice. You step back inside the hut. The warmth greets you immediately, soft and smoky. The family stirs as the door closes. The father sits up, rubbing his eyes. The mother adjusts her shawl. A few sparks rise from the hearth as she stirs the ashes, coaxing new flame from the coals. The room brightens slightly, shadows shifting back into place. Folklore hints at a morning charm many used before stepping out into the cold. They would touch the hearth's edge with their fingertips and then their lips, a simple gesture to carry the fire's spirit with them. It was both habit and faith, a small insurance against the dangers of frost and fatigue. You sit again by the hearth, watching the flame rebuild itself. The smell of smoke is stronger now, mixing with the earthy scent of thawing straw. Outside, the sky is growing pale gold. The village exhales as the day begins. For a moment, you close your eyes and listen to the soft harmony of waking life. The creak of wood, the distant bark of a dog, the first swing of an axe on frozen timber. Every sound feels ancient, familiar. This is not just a morning but a renewal, proof that warmth and life persist even when the world seems frozen solid. The fire catches fully at last. The hut glows with color. You stretch your hands toward it, feeling blood return to your fingertips. You know that beyond these walls, the snow still rules, but inside, the balance has shifted. Life has won another day. The pale light of dawn filters through the window, and a faint warmth begins to stir in the air. The fire has been fed again, and its flames stretch upward, reclaiming their hold on the cold. You blink the sleep from your eyes, hearing the quiet rhythm of the family waking. Straw rustles as blankets shift, and the smell of smoke deepens as the embers revive. It is widely recorded that in winter, mornings began not with sunlight but with the stirring of the hearth. The first task of the day was always the same, to coax new life from the ashes. Fire-making was an art of patience. A few glowing coals buried overnight would be uncovered, fanned, and fed with dry twigs. Sparks caught slowly, smoke thickened, and then the room bloomed once again with gold. You watch as the mother kneels by the fire, her movements practiced and calm. She blows gently into the coals, her breath steady, her face glowing in the rising light. The father stands behind her, shaking loose bits of frost from his cloak. Their children huddle together, still half asleep, wrapped in the same blanket that had guarded them through the night. The scene feels ordinary, yet holy in its rhythm. A curious detail often overlooked is that medieval families used ashes not only to keep fires alive but to clean and preserve. Ash, mixed with water, created a mild lye solution for washing utensils, hands, even hair. In the winter, when water froze and soap was scarce, ash was their quiet ally. What looked like waste was in truth a tool of survival. You look into the hearth and see grey powder surrounding the new flame. The smell is earthy and faintly metallic. When stirred, the ashes reveal tiny sparks buried deep within, small reminders that warmth never truly dies, it only hides. You think of how many generations learned that same lesson by the light of the fire. According to local accounts written centuries later, morning chores began in the dim half-light. Men carried buckets to the frozen well, the sound of clanking iron echoing through the village. Women tended animals or kneaded dough, their hands moving rhythmically while the air still held the chill of night. The first hours of daylight were quiet but purposeful, shaped by hunger and habit. You hear the father outside now, scraping the snow from the roof. Each scrape sends a soft cascade of frost falling to the ground. Inside, the mother stirs a pot hung above the fire. The smell of porridge slowly fills the room, simple and comforting. Barley, oats, or whatever grain could be spared was boiled with water or milk, thickened, and served with a bit of honey when fortune allowed. An odd little custom existed in some villages where the first spoonful of food was set aside for the household spirit, a being of the hearth that protected the home. The portion would be dropped into the fire or left in a small bowl nearby. It might sound like superstition, but for those who lived through winters on little more than faith, such gestures kept hope alive. You take a deep breath, and the steam from the pot warms your face. The aroma of cooked grain mixes with the scent of smoke, creating a fragrance that feels ancient and grounding. The youngest child sits up and rubs her eyes. She smiles sleepily, her hair tangled and glinting in the light. Her mother hands her a wooden cup filled with the thick, warm porridge. The child blows on it before tasting, a small puff of steam drifting up like a blessing. There is ongoing discussion among social historians about how daily rhythms shaped resilience in medieval life. Some argue that the repetition of chores created comfort, a structure that gave meaning to hardship. Others suggest it bred fatigue and dullness. Yet as you watch this scene unfold, it seems clear that routine was their quiet salvation. To know what came next meant survival. The father returns, stamping the snow from his boots. He kneels by the fire, accepting his bowl with a tired nod. Steam rises in slow ribbons, catching the morning light. For a moment, no one speaks. The hut is filled only with the sound of spoons scraping against wooden bowls and the low crackle of burning wood. The silence feels peaceful, earned. A lesser-known detail about these early hours is that people often said a short prayer not only for their own day but for the fire itself. The hearth was their constant companion, as vital as breath. To bless it was to bless the home. Let the flame live, they might murmur, tracing a circle in the air. The gesture lingered long after religion divided kingdoms. It was older than any creed. Outside, light spread slowly over the snow. The sound of other huts stirring carries through the air. The thump of an axe, the cry of a rooster, the faint laugh of a child running toward the well. The village comes alive one breath at a time. Smoke rises from rooftops, twisting into the pale morning sky. You look back at the hearth and see how the ashes have settled again, pale and soft around the flame. The family finishes their meal, leaving behind only faint streaks in their bowls. Soon they will scatter, each to their own tasks. But for now, there is stillness, a fragile calm between sleep and labor. Folklore hints at an old saying, ashes are the footprints of yesterday's Sunday. It meant that every morning began with what the night had left behind, that even in loss there was the seed of renewal. You repeat the phrase silently and feel its truth in the quiet room. The father rises, taking a long breath before stepping outside into the biting air. The mother gathers the bowls, stacking them neatly beside the chest. The fire crackles softly, content. You sit a moment longer, feeling the warmth soak into your bones. The day has begun again, as it always does, with gratitude hidden inside routine. You stretch your hands toward the flame and think of the ashes beneath it, remnants of the past, foundations for the future. Outside, the world is white and endless, but here, in this little hut, life endures in the simplest of acts, stirring the fire, sharing a meal, and greeting another day. The sun finally climbs over the horizon, spilling pale light into the village. The snow outside flashes gold where it lies undisturbed. Inside, the air hums softly with new motion. You can hear the faint sounds of sweeping, the dull knock of wood against wood, the sigh of people waking fully. Another winter day has begun, slow but inevitable. It is widely recorded that the long medieval winters shaped the calendar of faith and labor. Every task, every celebration, even every hour of rest was guided by holy days. Religion gave rhythm to hardship. As daylight faded, festivals, prayers, and fasting filled the months with meaning, keeping despair at bay when the earth slept. You glance toward the corner of the hut, where a small wooden cross hangs from a peg. The light from the fire touches it, casting a long shadow across the wall. The mother kneels briefly before it, her lips moving in a quiet prayer. Her children mimic her, half serious, half sleepy, crossing themselves as she rises. The gesture feels instinctive, like tending the fire or drawing breath. According to parish records, winter was the most devotional season. People had fewer hours of daylight to work, and so they turned inward. Priests traveled between villages, performing blessings over homes and barns. Holy water sprinkled on doorways mixed with frost, sealing both faith and ice together. In this world, survival was always part miracle. An unusual superstition thrived in these months, that evil spirits grew stronger in the long dark and that holy days could hold them back. Villagers believed that the ringing of church bells during Advent or Candlemas could shatter the cold's grip on their souls. Bells echoed across frozen fields, each toll carrying warmth that no fire could give. You imagine that sound, deep and slow, rolling over the snow like a promise. A curious detail often overlooked is how these religious observances intertwined with practical life. Feast days were not only for prayer but for rest, for mending, for the small joys of company. Food was shared, fires were stoked higher, songs were sung. Even fasting, which seems austere to modern eyes, had a quiet logic. It conserved dwindling supplies while framing restraint as virtue. In hardship, faith became wisdom disguised as ritual. There's ongoing discussion among historians about whether devotion was born from fear or gratitude. Some argue that the church filled the silence of winter with structure, a shield against despair. Others believe faith was simply the natural language of endurance, a way for people to say, "We are still here." Both explanations feel true when you sit inside a hut like this, feeling the weight of the cold beyond the walls. The father returns from outside, shaking snow from his boots. He carries a handful of twigs for the fire and a small loaf of bread. The smell of fresh smoke fills the room again. The family gathers for a short morning prayer before eating. They close their eyes, heads bowed, and murmur together, their breath rising in little clouds. The sound is soft but full, like the hum of a hive. Folklore hints at another winter practice. On certain holy nights, people believed that animals could speak at midnight, thanking their masters for care. No one dared listen too closely, fearing they might hear a prediction they could not bear. So, they left their livestock, small gifts, salt, hay, or bread, then returned inside, content to let mystery remain mystery. It was faith wrapped in tenderness, proof that even superstition could carry love. You take a sip of the warm drink the mother offers, perhaps watered ale or broth, and feel its heat settle in your chest. Around you, The family begins to prepare for the day's tasks. The father mends a broken strap. The children gather straw from the floor. The mother folds the bedding neatly by the wall. Everything happens with a rhythm that feels older than language. It is widely recorded that medieval winters were filled not only with labour but with small moments of celebration. Candlemas, St. Brigid's Day, and the feast of St. Nicholas all brightened the calendar. People decorated their hearths with evergreen branches, symbols of endurance and eternal life. The greenery stayed until it dried and dropped needles on the floor, a gentle reminder that even faith fades and returns in cycles. An odd little custom survived in certain parts of England and Scandinavia. On particularly long nights, villagers placed a candle in the window to guide wandering souls back to warmth. The candle burned low through the night, a fragile beacon in endless darkness. Travellers who saw its glow might stop for a meal or rest, trusting that kindness still lived behind the wooden walls. The act blurred the line between charity and prayer, between neighbour and stranger. You sit quietly and let the warmth of these rituals seep into you. The firelight flickers over faces, softening them, turning the ordinary into the sacred. You begin to understand how belief was not just a system but a feeling, as real as hunger, as necessary as warmth. Some researchers question whether the strict calendar of feasts and fasts truly brought comfort to everyone. Peasants often worked through holy days, driven by survival, while the wealthy celebrated lavishly. Yet even so, the idea of shared sacred time united the community. When one bell rang, all stopped together. The rhythm of faith gave everyone the same heartbeat. The morning grows brighter. A sliver of sunlight touches the cross on the wall, and for a brief moment it gleams as though alive. The hut smells of smoke, bread, and pine. The family bows their heads once more, murmuring thanks before stepping out into the cold day. You watch them go, the door swinging shut behind them. Inside, silence returns, but it feels different now, less empty, more full of meaning. You realize that every prayer, every ritual, every small act of gratitude has kept the winter bearable for centuries. Faith, like fire, does not need to roar to keep the dark away. It only needs to stay lit. The sunlight brightens through the parchment window, and the air inside the hut feels almost gentle for the first time in many days. The fire hums low, the room bathed in a sleepy gold. You sit near the hearth, stretching your hands toward the warmth, and realize that the rhythm of night and day has already begun to reset itself. It feels natural, steady, like a breath that never ends. It is widely recorded that medieval people divided their sleep in ways that seem strange now but made perfect sense then. The long winter nights were too lengthy for a single stretch of rest. People would sleep in two intervals, the first beginning soon after dark and lasting until midnight, the second following a quiet period of wakefulness before dawn. Between the two, life moved gently in that half-lit pause. You picture the family in this hut, how they must have lived inside that rhythm without thinking. The first sleep came easily after the day's labour. They would rise in the middle of the night, tend the fire, perhaps whisper a prayer or share a drink, then return to bed until morning. This second sleep, lighter and softer, carried dreams that felt closer to morning light. According to early writings and personal letters, this pattern existed across Europe. Monks, peasants, and nobles alike described the same habit. The phrase, first sleep, appears in dozens of manuscripts, always written with casual certainty, as though everyone would know what it meant. The idea of one continuous 8-hour rest is a modern invention, born of clocks and schedules. The medieval body knew another truth. A curious detail often forgotten is that these middle hours were not seen as lost time. They were used for quiet tasks that required no sunlight, mending, writing, prayer, or conversation. For couples, it was a time of closeness and warmth, a brief space carved out from the demands of day. For the solitary, it was the hour of thought, when dreams still clung to the mind and imagination wandered freely. There is ongoing discussion among sleep historians about whether this segmented rhythm was healthier than our modern one. Some suggest that natural darkness and silence allowed the body to rest more deeply. Others think the interruptions led to fatigue. Yet the pattern endured for centuries, which suggests it worked well enough. The human body, after all, adapts to the rhythm of the world around it. You shift slightly and feel the straw beneath you creak. It is easy to imagine how the hut itself would guide such a cycle. The fire faded after a few hours. The chill returned, and waking became inevitable. The need to tend the embers shaped the night. In a way, even sleep depended on teamwork. One person rising to stir the coals while others dozed, each taking turns to keep the warmth alive. An odd little superstition accompanied this habit. Some villagers believed that if you woke after midnight and found the fire completely dead, it was bad luck to relight it immediately. You were meant to wait until a rooster crowed, or until a spark caught naturally from the ash. Forcing a flame, they said, might invite restless spirits inside. It was a strange mix of caution and patience, but in a world so fragile, every small ritual mattered. You look toward the small window again, where the light has grown stronger. The snow outside gleams softly, and the cold seems less threatening now. You imagine the father of the family stepping out to gather wood after his second sleep, while the mother kneads dough by the fire. The children stir, rubbing their eyes, their voices soft as they speak to one another. Morning begins not with alarm, but with awareness. It is widely recorded that artificial light changed this rhythm forever. With candles and oil lamps came the power to stretch the day. People began working later, sleeping later, forgetting the slow pattern that nature had set. The age of the first and second sleep faded quietly into history, surviving only in old diaries and forgotten words. Yet here, in this hut, that rhythm still feels alive. A lesser-known custom from these waking hours was the midnight talk. Families would sit quietly together, sometimes sharing food, sometimes simply telling stories. The tone was softer than in daylight, the words more honest. Many confessions, apologies, and dreams were spoken in that liminal time. When dawn came, the world felt cleaner, the heart lighter. Perhaps that is why they cherished those dark hours as more than rest. Folklore hints at another belief, that the space between first and second sleep belonged to the unseen world. Dreams from the first half of the night were personal, but visions from the second were said to be prophetic. Some people kept a small notebook or carved stick nearby to mark what they saw in dreams before they vanished. They called these night memories, fragments of wisdom caught between two sleeps. You close your eyes and try to feel that rhythm yourself. The warmth of the fire, the soft hum of life around you, the quiet after waking. You can almost sense how time stretches differently here. There is no rush, no pressure to force sleep or fight it. The night breathes naturally, and you follow. Some researchers question whether our ancestors even considered this pattern unusual. Perhaps they did not think in hours or schedules, but in sensations: hunger, warmth, fatigue, and light. They moved with the pulse of nature rather than against it. In that sense, their nights might have felt calmer than ours, filled with purpose instead of restlessness. You open your eyes again and watch the flame. It bends gently, licking the air in slow waves. The hut is brightening, the frost on the wall melting into drops. Another day will soon begin, and this quiet rhythm will repeat again when the sun disappears. You think of how many thousands of nights have followed this same cycle, how many fires have been stirred, how many dreams have bridged the space between sleeps. In that pattern lies something ancient and reassuring, the knowledge that even rest has its seasons, that even darkness has its hours of light. The hut smells faintly of ash and morning smoke. A single wisp of air rises from the hearth as the last log settles into embers. You sit close to the glow, watching the faint shimmer of red that still clings to the wood. The light is tired now, flickering low and slow, but it holds enough strength to feed another flame. This moment, when night releases its last warmth to the day, feels sacred. It is widely recorded that keeping a fire alive through winter nights was both a skill and an art. Without it, families risked waking to frozen water, stiff limbs, and sometimes death. Fires were rarely allowed to die completely. Instead, people buried the embers in ash before sleeping, sealing them from air so that they would smolder until morning. With the right touch, those coals could be revived at dawn into a new blaze, as if the sun itself had never truly left. You pick up a small stick and stir the ashes gently. Beneath the pale grey surface, orange light flickers faintly like the heartbeat of a sleeping creature. You understand why they called it the house's soul. Losing that glow meant more than losing heat. It meant breaking a thread of continuity. The flame that burned today was the same one that had burned yesterday, maybe even the same that had burned all season. A curious detail often forgotten is how many small inventions were born from the effort to preserve this continuity. In some villages, people used peat bricks or dried turf to keep fires smouldering longer. In others, they packed embers into clay pots with air holes, carrying them from home to help neighbors relight their hearths. The gift of fire was both practical and symbolic, a quiet sign of friendship stronger than words. According to local records, peat was treasured for its steady burn. It gave off less smoke than wood and lasted through the night. Families who lived near boglands guarded their peat stores as fiercely as gold. The smell of it, sweet and heavy, was the scent of safety itself. You can almost imagine the hut filled with that dark fragrance, comforting and earthy, mingling with the smell of wool and smoke. An odd little custom existed among some farmers who believed that the fire had to be thanked before sleep. Each night, before covering the coals, someone would whisper a short phrase of gratitude: rest, flame, and wake again. The words sound simple, but they carried deep reverence. In a world without guarantees, the fire was the one companion that answered when called. There is ongoing discussion among historians about how early chimneys changed domestic life. Before them, smoke simply gathered and drifted out through the roof hole, blackening the timbers but warming the air. With chimneys came cleaner breathing, but also a subtle loss of intimacy. The hearth had been central, shared by all. The chimney pulled its warmth upward and away. Progress, even then, had its trade-offs. You glance upward at the roof, where black soot lines the beams like an artist's brush. Each mark tells of 1,000 fires, 1,000 nights of breath and warmth. The air smells faintly metallic, and when you look closely, you can see how the soot has preserved the wood beneath, keeping it strong through decades of flame. The hut is a memory written in smoke. It is widely recorded that women often tended the hearth, keeping it alive while men worked outside. To them, the fire was both duty and companion. Songs survive in scattered verses, sung softly while stirring the coals. The melodies are simple, the words repetitive, built to calm the mind, as the flames were coaxed to life. You imagine that soft singing now, low and steady, part lullaby, part prayer. Some researchers question how much time was devoted to maintaining the fire, given how much fuel had to be conserved. Gathering wood or peat was hard labor, often done miles from home. Every log was accounted for, every spark respected. To waste fuel was to court hunger. Yet people found balance, learning to read the fire's language, the hiss that warned of damp wood, the crackle that signaled it was alive and well. Folklore hints at another belief, that a well-kept hearth protected not only the body but the spirit. If your fire burned evenly and without smoke, it meant your household was at peace. If it sputtered or filled the room with soot, someone nearby had spoken unkindly. The cure was simple: Sweep the ashes clean, whisper a kind word, and start again. The wisdom feels less like superstition and more like the poetry of survival. You watch as the father of the hut returns from outside carrying a handful of small branches. He kneels by the hearth, brushing away the top layer of ash. A faint glow greets him. He smiles, places the twigs gently on top, and blows softly. The light grows, timid at first, then stronger. Soon a thin flame curls upward, catching, spreading, devouring the dry wood. The family exhales together as the room fills once more with warmth. A lesser-known tradition described in Northern chronicles involved carrying a glowing ember from the hearth to bless the livestock each morning. The ember was waved in slow circles near the barn door, while prayers were whispered for health and milk. Fire was not only warmth but power, the living boundary between safety and the cold unknown. You sit back and study the fire again. Its glow deepens, steady now, filling the space with gentle light. You feel how fragile yet eternal it is, how it mirrors the heartbeat of life itself. In a single night it can be smothered or renewed. Its survival depends entirely on care. You think of how easy it is, in modern life, to forget such dependence. Yet here, surrounded by the scent of smoke and the sound of the flames' quiet breathing, you understand that every comfort you have known began with this simple ritual, tending the fire, watching it live, whispering to it not to die. The father stands and brushes his hands clean. The mother stirs a pot above the flames. Outside, sunlight touches the snow, turning it to a field of diamonds. Inside, the hut glows gold again, a tiny world kept alive by a flicker. You close your eyes, feeling its warmth reach you, ancient and patient. The day has begun, but the story of the fire never ends. The air inside the hut smells of herbs now, sweet and sharp, filling every corner with a faint haze. You breathe it in, letting the warmth and fragrance mingle. Someone is tending a small pot near the fire, stirring slowly, and the steam that rises curls like ghostly ribbons. This is not food but medicine, the kind that keeps the cold from sinking too deep into the bones. It is widely recorded that medieval families relied on herbs and home remedies through the long winter months. Doctors were far away, and coin was scarce, so the household became its own apothecary. Dried bundles of sage, thyme, and rosemary hung from the rafters like trophies from summer's generosity. Each leaf carried both scent and promise, a fragment of warmth preserved for when it was needed most. You watch as the mother crushes something between her fingers and drops it into the pot. The smell shifts to something earthy and resinous. This was how healing looked before white rooms and glass bottles. The wisdom came from the ground itself. A curious detail often forgotten is that many of these herbs served both physical and spiritual purposes. Juniper smoke was used to disinfect the air, but it was also burned to drive away misfortune. Garlic kept infection from festering, and so people claimed, frightened off the unseen. Whether one believed in spirits or simply in scent, it hardly mattered. Every breath of that fragrant air felt protective. According to a few surviving herbal guides written in the 15th century, every region had its own trusted recipes. A warm drink of honey and vinegar eased coughs. Salt and ash cured toothaches. A poultice of onion or mustard was pressed against the chest to open lungs frozen by cold air. These remedies sound simple, yet they kept generations alive when winter punished both body and mind. An odd little custom lingered in the northern villages. On the first day of deep frost, the eldest woman in the household would walk around the hut with a cup of warm milk mixed with herbs, sprinkling drops at the corners while muttering short blessings. This ritual was meant to invite good dreams and good health. The mixture, called the fire's drink, was also poured onto the hearth to please the household spirit. You lean closer to the pot and catch the scent of honey mixing with the herbs. It is rich, soothing, almost intoxicating. The steam softens your face, and you can see how the people here might have found comfort in the act of tending to such brews. Healing began long before anyone tasted the medicine. It started with the sound of water simmering, the smell of familiar leaves, the touch of warmth returning to numb fingers. There is ongoing discussion among historians about how much of this herbal knowledge was inherited from pagan traditions and how much came from church monasteries. Monks kept careful gardens and recorded recipes, but many remedies were older than any written word, passed from mother to daughter, whispered beside the fire rather than taught in halls of learning. Perhaps that blend of sacred and practical was what made it endure. You notice bundles of dried plants hanging from the beams above. Their shadows sway gently in the firelight. Some are tied with red string, others with plain twine. The colors matter. Red for life, white for purity, green for endurance. Each knot a quiet spell against illness and hunger. You can almost hear the rustle of dried leaves whispering as the air warms them. A lesser-known practice used in sickness was the bed charm. If someone fell ill, the straw beneath their bedding was burned and replaced with new straw mixed with herbs. The act symbolized renewal, a physical and spiritual cleansing. The smoke that rose carried the sickness away, or so they believed. Even modern historians admit that the practice might have worked by accident, as smoke and new bedding reduced pests and infection. You think about the delicate balance they lived in, how every breath of warmth carried danger but also cure. Illness came easily in the cold. Coughs turned to fever, frostbite to infection. Yet somehow, people endured, relying on wisdom stitched together from scent, habit, and prayer. An unusual superstition appears in certain winter records. Before drinking any medicinal brew, a person had to blow across the surface 3 times to cool the spirit. The breath was thought to carry part of the soul, mingling with the steam and helping the remedy take hold. You picture someone sitting just where you are now, holding a cup of hot liquid, exhaling softly into the air before drinking. It feels like a ritual of both body and belief. The father coughs quietly, and the mother ladles some of the fragrant brew into a small wooden bowl. He drinks, grimaces at the taste, then smiles as warmth spreads through him. The children giggle softly at his expression, and for a moment, laughter fills the hut. Healing, it seems, lives as much in shared joy as in medicine. It is widely recorded that honey was one of the most valued ingredients of the age. It sweetened medicine, healed wounds, and preserved fruit through winter. Its golden glow mirrored the fires, another reminder of summer caught and stored for darker months. You look at the pot and see that same glow swirling within the steam. Folklore hints at another practice used during sickness. Families would place an iron tool, like a small knife or a nail, beside the bed to guard the sleeper from fever demons. The church frowned upon such customs, yet they persisted. In their quiet way, these small gestures gave people the sense that something unseen was watching over them. You sit back and listen as the hut settles again. The fire crackles gently, the smell of herbs softens, and the air grows warmer by degrees. You realize that medicine, in this time, was never separate from daily life. It was cooked, shared, inhaled, and believed in. Healing was not a miracle from afar, but a partnership with the earth itself. The mother removes the pot from the fire, setting it aside to cool. The family relaxes, their faces calm. Outside, snow still falls, silent and unbothered. Inside, the scent of sage and honey lingers like a lullaby. You breathe it in and feel the warmth spread through you too, gentle and slow, like the fire itself whispering that life endures. The day drifts by quietly, the light outside slow and golden, and soon evening folds itself back around the little hut. The fire burns steady again, humming softly as the smoke curls up toward the roof. The room smells of wood, herbs, and the faint sweetness of baked grain. You sit near the hearth, letting your eyes wander over every corner of this small, self-contained world. It is widely recorded that for most medieval families the hut was more than shelter. It was their entire universe. Every birth, every meal, Every sickness and prayer happened within the same walls. The structure was at once a kitchen, a chapel, a nursery, and a grave. When winter closed the world outside, life condensed into this single glowing space. You look toward the far corner where the straw bed lies, its uneven surface molded to the shapes of those who have slept there. Beside it sits a wooden chest, the only piece of furniture that locks. Inside would be a family's greatest treasures: a handful of coins, a folded cloak, a small Bible, or a charm against misfortune. These things were not just possessions but fragments of identity, proof that a family had roots and history even if their walls were made of pine. A curious detail often overlooked is how huts were built with the idea of the circle in mind. The fire sat in the center, and life revolved around it like the planets around Sunday. Children played near it, elders told stories beside it, lovers whispered in its light. The circle held both safety and symbolism. What happens within it is bound, protected, eternal. According to parish accounts and old building records, the average hut measured less than 20 square feet of open floor, and yet it held everything. Meat was salted and hung near the roof beams, clothes dried beside the fire, and tools leaned against the walls, each one with its own memory. A spinning wheel in one corner might have belonged to a grandmother now gone, her rhythm still echoing faintly in its creak. An odd little custom endured in these small homes. At the beginning of winter, someone would scratch a simple mark into the main beam of the house, often a cross or a circle. It was called the house's breath, a blessing meant to remind the spirit of the hut to stay awake and watchful. Each year, a new mark was carved beside the old one, building a quiet history into the wood itself. You run your hand over the nearest wall and feel the grooves in the timber. The wood is smooth from age and smoke, but beneath the soot lies texture lines carved by years of weather and by the same hands that built it. It is easy to imagine the family feeling the same grain each day, tracing their fingers along it as though greeting an old friend. There is ongoing discussion among cultural historians about how people understood home in this era. Some say it was purely practical, a place of labor and shelter. Others believe it carried spiritual weight, almost like a living presence. The truth is probably both. When a single room held the entire rhythm of life, it could not help but feel sacred. A lesser-known practice recorded in certain northern parishes involved speaking to the house. Before leaving for long journeys, a traveller would tap the doorway 3 times and murmur a short farewell. On return, the same gesture would be made in greeting. The habit may sound superstitious, but perhaps it was simply gratitude, an acknowledgement of the walls that kept death away while the world outside froze. You turn back toward the hearth. The fire glows softly now, its reflection dancing across the curved pot that hangs above it. The mother hums as she works, her voice low and soothing. The children sit nearby, threading bits of straw into small dolls, their laughter blending with the pop of burning wood. Every detail feels contained, complete. It is widely recorded that medieval homes blurred the line between sacred and mundane. The same space that held laughter also held mourning. The same corner that cradled a newborn would one day hold a coffin. Yet this closeness gave life a clarity that modern distance often hides. Joy and grief shared the same air, and in that union, both felt honest. An unusual superstition from southern Europe suggested that the spirit of the house could be offended by shouting or harsh words. Quarrels were thought to weaken the timber, letting drafts and misfortunes slip inside. So, many households observed a kind of unspoken peace in the evening. Disagreements waited for morning when the cold air could carry them away. You watch the father repair a wooden tool by the light of the fire. His movements are slow and deliberate, every sound amplified by the quiet. The hut creaks occasionally, as if responding. You begin to feel what they must have felt, that the house itself listened. It was more than walls and roof. It was witness, shelter, and companion. Folklore hints that when someone died, their family would knock on the walls 3 times to let the house know. Then they would open every window and door for an hour, giving the spirit space to depart. The ritual mixed practicality with poetry, allowing both air and grief to move freely. To live so close to the elements meant that even mourning followed the rhythm of the wind. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine that this little hut could remember everything it has seen. The laughter of children, the murmur of prayer, the trembling of storm winds above the roof. The walls might hold all of it, stored like warmth in wood grain. The fire sighs again, and the mother sets aside her work. The family draws closer to the hearth, gathering into that quiet circle. Their faces glow in the orange light, calm and content. The father speaks softly, his words lost under the crackle, but the rhythm of his voice carries meaning. Another day survived, another night safely begun. You sit with them, breathing in the scent of smoke and pine, and for a moment, the rest of the world falls away. The hut feels infinite, a universe contained within walls no taller than a man's reach. In its silence lies the oldest truth of all that warmth, no matter how small, is the center of everything. The fire has burned low again, and the room settles into its slow evening rhythm. The sounds of the outside world fade, leaving only the soft whisper of wind brushing against the thatch. You can feel the change in the air, the deep cold returning. Inside the hut, everything seems smaller, tighter, more intimate. You look toward the straw bed, where the children are curled together, small bundles wrapped in wool and sleep. It is widely recorded that childhood in the Middle Ages was short and practical, yet winter gave it its own kind of softness. The cold drew families closer, slowing life enough for small joys to take root. When snow covered the fields and work paused, children played beside the fire or helped with small tasks that made them feel grown. They learned survival not from lessons but from watching, listening, and doing. You hear one of them murmur in sleep, turning slightly. The mother adjusts the blanket, her touch automatic, her face calm. There is tenderness here, a kind born from shared struggle rather than abundance. In these months, affection was not shown through gifts but through warmth itself, the act of making sure no one froze in the dark. A curious detail often forgotten is that medieval children were expected to work from an early age, yet winter gave them moments of rest and wonder. When the ground froze and farming stopped, there were games played with sticks and bits of cloth, songs learned by firelight, riddles shared between siblings. They did not have toys in the way we imagine them, but their imaginations filled the gaps easily. A carved piece of wood became a horse, a frozen puddle became an adventure. According to surviving nursery rhymes written down centuries later, the songs mothers sang in winter were simple and repetitive, meant to calm both child and parent. Many contained small blessings, sleep warm, little one, while the wind walks by. The rhythm of those songs matched the crackle of the fire and the creak of the roof, creating a music that felt as old as the wood itself. Look at the children again. Their cheeks are flushed from heat and sleep, their hair damp with the faint humidity of the room. One of them has a small carved toy in hand, a crude figure of an animal, perhaps a sheep. You imagine the father carving it during the long nights, his knife moving slowly in the dim light, his love hidden in the detail of its shape. An odd little custom appears in accounts from the far north. Parents would place an apple or a piece of bread beneath a child's pillow during the hardest winters, believing it would draw away sickness. The fruit absorbed the chill, they said, keeping the heart safe. Whether the charm worked or not, it must have been comforting to wake and find something sweet waiting at dawn. There is ongoing discussion among historians about how much freedom children really had in this world. Some claim they were treated as small adults, others that families protected their innocence more than records suggest. The truth may be quieter than either view. Here, in this little hut, childhood feels like a thread woven tightly into the fabric of survival, brief, precious, and inseparable from the life around it. It is widely recorded that in winter, families told stories to teach children both morality and courage. Tales of brave saints, clever peasants, or animals that outwitted the cold filled the evenings. These stories were not only entertainment, they were blueprints for endurance. They taught that fear could be met with wit, that kindness brought luck, and that every harsh season would one day pass. A lesser-known detail from such tales is that many ended not with triumph, but with rest. The hero survives the storm and returns home to the hearth. Victory, in these stories, is not glory but survival. You can almost hear the mother's voice, slow and steady, as she finishes a tale and watches her children's eyes grow heavy with sleep. Folklore hints at another habit. When children were restless or frightened by the night's howling winds, parents would draw small symbols on their foreheads using ash from the hearth. It was called the fire's touch, a gesture meant to protect dreams. Ash carried meaning. It was what remained after destruction and what began every new flame. With that small mark, fear lost its edge. You glance toward the roof where a few icicles hang through small gaps, catching the firelight like glass. A drop of water falls, hitting the floor with a faint hiss as it meets the warm air. The hut feels both fragile and unbreakable at once. You think of the children who grew up here, who would remember this sound for the rest of their lives, the quiet symphony of survival. Some researchers question whether these winters built resilience or simply endurance. Perhaps both. The hardships carved patience into them, but the warmth carved love. What you see here is not misery but intimacy, life reduced to what truly matters. The mother leans against the wall now, eyes half closed, listening to the children breathe. Her lips move faintly, perhaps whispering another blessing, perhaps simply counting the hours till dawn. Outside, the snow falls harder, but the hut stands steady. The air smells faintly of wood, wool, and the faint sweetness of honey from supper. You close your eyes and listen to the rhythm of sleep. The crackle of fire, the whisper of wind, the breathing of children. It feels eternal, as if every generation has left its echo inside this small, smoky room. In that moment, you understand why winter never broke them. The cold could reach the walls, but never the heart. Within these fragile huts, in the laughter of children and the softness of their sleep, the warmth of the world was kept alive. The night has deepened again, and the cold presses close. You hear a faint, shifting sound near the door, followed by the soft grunt of something large. The firelight flickers, catching a glint of movement in the corner. It takes you a moment to realize what it is. An animal, resting quietly inside the hut, breathing slow clouds of steam into the air. Its warmth fills the space like another small fire. It is widely recorded that medieval families often shared their living quarters with animals, especially in winter. Cows, goats, pigs, chickens, even dogs were brought indoors when frost made the barns unsafe. The heat of their bodies could raise the room's temperature by several degrees, enough to make the difference between life and death. This arrangement blurred the boundary between household and barn, but it also reflected the simple wisdom of coexistence. You move closer, careful not to startle the creature. It is a cow, her dark eyes glinting in the glow. She shifts her weight, the straw rustling beneath her hooves. The smell that rises is strong, earthy, yet not unpleasant. It is the smell of life itself, of breath and shelter. In this space, human and animal survival are tied together. A curious detail often forgotten is that the placement of animals inside the hut followed a pattern. Larger livestock, like cows and goats, stayed near the wall to the north, away from drafts. Smaller animals, like hens and dogs, occupied corners close to the fire. The warmth they produced helped dry the air, and their presence offered comfort during long nights. Children often fell asleep to the gentle sounds of chewing or the rhythmic clucking of hens settling down. According to monastic agricultural notes, animals were thought to share a special connection with the divine because they lived so close to creation. Their steady endurance through the seasons became a model for faith. Farmers treated them with respect that mixed practicality and affection. To tend a cow well was to tend one's own spirit. An odd little custom appears in many rural regions. Families whispered small blessings to their animals before sleeping, thanking them for their milk, their wool, or their strength. Sleep warm, they would say, or keep the breath of life. Some even believed that an animal that dreamed peacefully brought luck to the household. In a way, these words transformed the hut into a shared chapel of warmth and gratitude. You listen now to the low sound of the cow's breathing, steady as a lullaby. It mixes with the faint crackle of the fire and the slow breathing of the family nearby. The air is heavy but alive, thick with warmth and the scent of hay. It feels as if every creature in this room belongs to one great heartbeat, a single rhythm of endurance. There is ongoing discussion among environmental historians about how this closeness affected human health. Some argue that living with animals spread illness and parasites. Others suggest that the shared heat and companionship outweighed the risk. The truth likely depends on the strength of the fire and the care of the hands that tended it. What is certain is that this intimacy between species shaped how people saw the natural world, not as something separate, but as kin. It is widely recorded that pigs were particularly valued as winter companions. They gave off remarkable warmth and were often allowed to sleep inside until spring. Their intelligence made them curious, even affectionate, and they learned to recognize the household's rhythms. Imagine waking to the sound of a snuffling nose at your side, or a gentle grunt when a fire flared. In this world, warmth erased barriers that modern life would never tolerate. A lesser-known detail appears in folklore. Some said that animals could sense storms long before humans could. When cows shifted restlessly or hens refused to roost, people took it as a sign to mend roofs and gather extra firewood. Nature spoke through them, and people listened. In that way, the hut became an echo chamber of instincts, where human and animal awareness merged. An unusual superstition followed the dog, the quiet guardian of many homes. It was believed that if a dog refused to sleep near the hearth, a spirit had entered the room. The family would place a piece of bread in the fire to appease the unseen presence, then pat the dog's head for protection. The warmth returned, and so did peace. Such beliefs might sound fanciful, yet they gave meaning to the small mysteries of living so close to nature. You glance again at the cow in the corner. Her breath fogs the air in short bursts, and her eyes close slowly. She seems content, patient in a way humans rarely are. The straw beneath her glows faintly in the firelight, golden and soft. You can see why people trusted animals as silent companions through the long dark. Their calm was contagious, their endurance steadying. Folklore hints at another tradition from midwinter feasts. On Christmas Eve or the solstice night, people left the stable doors open for a few moments at midnight, so that the animals could see the stars. It was said that all beasts bowed their heads then, honoring the night of peace. Whether true or not, the image lingers, a quiet gathering of breath and frost under the moon. You sit again by the fire and listen to the mingled sounds of the hut, the crackle of wood, the slow chew of hay, the soft snore of a sleeping child. Everything breathes together, sharing the same air, the same warmth. It is life at its simplest and most complete. Some researchers question when this closeness began to fade. As homes grew larger and barns moved farther away, warmth became private, divided by walls and distance. Yet here, in this small space, you feel how natural that unity once was. No one was alone in the cold. All creation gathered under one roof. You close your eyes, breathing deeply. The scent of hay and smoke fills you, grounding you. In that moment, the line between human and animal dissolves. There is only warmth, only breath, only the steady pulse of life refusing to yield to the winter night. The night moves on softly. Outside, the wind curls around the hut like a slow tide. Inside, the fire glows low and steady, its heartbeat constant. You can almost count the hours by its sound. The family sleeps now, the animals doze in their corners, and yet you remain awake, listening. The silence is never perfect here. Beneath it hums a quiet chorus of breath, crackle, and pulse. It is widely recorded that sleeplessness was common in medieval winters. Nights stretched far longer than the body required for rest. Without clocks or candles, people relied on instinct to decide whether to rise or drift again into dreams. In those long stretches of wakefulness, minds wandered, prayers grew longer, and thoughts deepened into something that blurred the edge between dream and meditation. You stare into the fire, feeling its warmth stroke your face. The light flickers gently across the wooden beams, and the patterns of soot and shadow seem to shift like waves. It is easy to see how imagination flourished here. In darkness, every flicker could become a vision, every sound a whisper from beyond. A curious detail often forgotten is that many villagers believed night thoughts carried special power. Words spoken after midnight, even softly, were thought to travel farther, to reach spirits or saints more clearly. Some people kept small midnight prayers hidden in memory, reserved for moments of deep stillness. They prayed not aloud, but in rhythm with the fire's breath. According to fragments from medieval diaries and religious commentaries, this half-waking state was often seen as a blessing rather than a burden. To lie awake was to listen to one's own soul, to the silence, to God, or perhaps to something simpler, the sound of survival itself. The line between wakefulness and dreaming blurred until they became the same thing. An odd little custom existed among those who suffered restless nights. A person might rise quietly, take a sip of ale or milk, and trace a small circle in the ashes of the fire with their fingertip. The gesture symbolized protection, sealing them back into calm. After that, they would settle again under their blanket, as if drawing comfort from the motion itself. You shift slightly and imagine that moment. The warmth of the fire still humming in the ashes, the faint hiss as you stir it, the sound of your own breath steadying. Sleep does not return immediately, but the mind grows softer. In this world, patience is the only cure for sleeplessness. There is ongoing discussion among scholars about how medieval people understood dreams and wakefulness. Some writings describe these midnight hours as sacred, a time when the divine world brushed against the mortal one. Others view them as practical pauses, a chance to check on the fire, the animals, or one's thoughts. Perhaps both are true. The spiritual and the ordinary shared the same breath in these small hours. It is widely recorded that during sleepless nights, people sometimes spoke to the dead, not in fear, but in remembrance. They would whisper names softly into the air, asking for guidance or simply company. In a world where loss was constant, memory itself became a form of presence. The warmth of the fire and the warmth of remembered love were not so different. You close your eyes and listen harder. The wind outside sighs like a slow exhale. The cow shifts in the corner, hooves tapping gently against the wood. A child coughs once, then settles. The mother murmurs something in her sleep, half prayer, half dream. The fire answers with a low crackle. Every sound blends into the next until silence becomes a song. A lesser-known belief said that those who stayed awake in kindness, watching over the sick, the fire, or a child, earned what was called the night's blessing. It meant that the quiet hours would remember you, that peace would follow you into waking life. You imagine a monk writing that phrase centuries ago, candlelight shaking, as he tried to describe something too gentle for words. An unusual superstition recorded in the Alpine regions told that if a person woke at exactly the same hour 3 nights in a row, it was a sign that someone far away was thinking of them. This idea comforted many who lived apart from loved ones during harsh winters. Wakefulness became connection instead of loneliness, a bridge built of thought rather than touch. You open your eyes again and see that the fire has shrunk to a bed of quiet coals. Each one glows like a small planet, pulsing in its orbit. You understand why so many medieval prayers compared the human soul to a coal dim on the surface, but alive within. Sleep, in that sense, was not escape but renewal, a return to the ember at the center of being. Some researchers question whether people in those centuries feared the night or befriended it. Perhaps both. They feared what lurked beyond the door, yet found peace in the dark's intimacy. The night revealed everything that daylight hid: fragility, wonder, patience, faith. To lie awake then was to be part of something larger than exhaustion. You take one more breath of the smoky air, feel the warmth on your hands, and listen as the last pieces of wood fall into ash. The fire sighs once, content. Sleep finds you easily this time, not as escape, but as a continuation of thought. The darkness closes around you like a cloak, soft and familiar, and the hut's breathing becomes your own. In that gentle drift between wakefulness and rest, you understand the secret of their endurance. They did not conquer the night. They simply learned how to live inside it. The cold outside tightens again, and frost creeps silently across the edges of the small window. Inside, the fire whispers, alive but tired. The air smells faintly of smoke and wool, and you can sense how the weight of the long season presses on everything. The family sleeps, yet even in slumber, there is a tension in the hut, a quiet endurance that runs deeper than words. It is widely recorded that the last stretch of winter was always the hardest. By February, the stores grew thin, the woodpile low, and tempers shorter. The body craved sunlight, the eyes ached for green. Hunger was not yet starvation, but hovered close enough to shadow every meal. Yet this was also when communities leaned most closely together, sharing what remained in gestures of generosity that were as vital as bread. You picture the family sitting by the fire on a day like this, counting what is left. A few dried apples, a small piece of salted meat, a handful of oats, each portion measured with care. They have done this every winter of their lives, learning that patience can stretch a single loaf across a week if it must. A curious detail often overlooked is that hunger in these months changed how people thought and prayed. Fasting was not a spiritual luxury, it was a daily reality. Church calendars spoke of abstinence as devotion, but the villagers already lived it. They prayed not to show faith, but to keep hope alive when bellies were empty. According to old letters and household records, the ingenuity of the poor showed itself most clearly in late winter. Families mixed ground bark into flour, boiled nettles and roots, brewed thin broth from bones already used twice. These meals may sound meagre, but each one was made with care, seasoned with whatever spice or salt they had hidden away. Hunger was met not with despair, but with quiet invention. An odd little custom persisted in many regions. When the first sign of thaw appeared, families placed a small bowl of their last grain outside for the birds. It was a way of bargaining with the season, an offering that said, "We trust that spring will return." Sometimes they called it feeding the hope. The sight of sparrows pecking at the gift reminded them that life still stirred beyond the snow. You can almost hear that sound now, the faint flutter of wings outside, the quick chirp of birds testing the air. The wind is softer than before, no longer a howl but a sigh. It carries the faint smell of thawing earth, of promises still fragile but near. There is ongoing discussion among historians about how communities balanced faith and famine. Some argue that religion was the only structure holding people together through those endless nights. Others insist that cooperation mattered more than prayer, yet perhaps the two were inseparable. To share bread was to practice belief. To light a neighbour's fire was to offer grace. It is widely recorded that in hard winters, people borrowed warmth as often as food. A neighbour might sleep near another family's hearth for a few nights when their own firewood ran out. There were no formal rules for such kindness, only quiet understanding. Survival belonged to everyone or to no one at all. A lesser-known story appears in an old English manuscript. It tells of a widow who kept her hearth burning, even when her cupboard was empty. When asked how, she said that people kept bringing her wood because they could not bear to see her chimney without smoke. Her fire became a kind of light for the entire village, a symbol that warmth could outlast scarcity. You sit closer to the flames, imagining how many unseen acts of care once took place in rooms like this. Someone shared a bit of salt, another gave a worn blanket, a child carried a spark across the snow to a neighbor's hearth. The smallest gestures became victories, and each one helped pull winter one step closer to its end. Folklore hints at another belief tied to these late months. If a person smiled while cutting the last piece of bread, it was said that spring would arrive sooner. The logic was not magical but emotional. To face the season's end with gratitude was to remind the heart that hunger was only temporary. Even when the cupboard echoed, people still found reason to give thanks. An unusual superstition found in rural France told that spilling grain in winter was unlucky because every seed was a future meal. If it happened by accident, one had to gather the kernels and kiss them before returning them to the pot. That small reverence for food carried both necessity and poetry. Every crumb mattered, every gesture acknowledged the fragility of life. You watch the fire slowly rebuild itself as the father stirs the coals. The family begins to wake, faces still drawn but calm. The mother hands each child a small piece of dried fruit, saving the rest for later. No one complains. They have learned the rhythm of waiting, the patience that only cold can teach. Some researchers question whether such scarcity hardened people or deepened their empathy. The records suggest both. Those who survived long winters together formed bonds that lasted a lifetime. They had looked into the same darkness and shared the same flicker of light. The hut grows quieter again as morning approaches. The fire hums softly, its glow steady and sure. Outside, the wind pauses, as though the world itself is holding its breath. You can feel that something has shifted. The cold is still here, but it no longer feels endless. The air carries a promise hidden inside it, like a seed sleeping under frost. You close your eyes and picture that promise, faint but strong. Spring is not yet visible, but it exists. You can almost hear the earth murmuring beneath the snow, preparing to breathe again. In the small, smoky hut, warmth remains, fragile and persistent. The family leans closer together, and the fire's light paints their faces in soft gold. For now, that is enough. The fire burns low again, softer now, but its rhythm feels steady. The hut glows faintly, and the air carries that familiar mix of smoke, wool, and humanity. Outside, a thin mist drapes across the snow, blurring the trees into ghostly shapes. The world beyond the door is silent except for the creak of branches in the cold. Inside, the family gathers once more, not for work this time, but for the quiet comfort of storytelling. It is widely recorded that winter nights in the Middle Ages were filled with stories. When work was impossible and travel too dangerous, the spoken word became the warmth of the mind. Tales were shared beside the hearth like food, passed from elder to child, from wanderer to villager. The stories carried lessons, humor, and sometimes warnings. They were the soft lamps of memory that burned through the darkness. You can see it now, the family sitting close, their faces lit by the trembling firelight. The father begins to speak, his voice low and slow. Each word rolls through the smoke like a piece of music, simple but steady. The children listen, eyes wide, their hands still. The mother smiles faintly, her gaze fixed on the flame. This is how time passes when the world sleeps under ice. A curious detail often forgotten is that storytelling was not only entertainment, but a way to teach survival. Many winter tales hid small lessons within them. A fable about a clever fox reminded listeners to think quickly when faced with danger. A story of a lost traveler taught them to stay near light and warmth. Even the silliest stories carried a thread of wisdom that stitched generations together. According to old manuscripts and fragments of oral poetry, these stories varied by region but shared a heartbeat. Every village had its own trickster, its own ghost, its own hero who defied the cold. The details changed, but the rhythm stayed. The act of telling, the cadence of voice, the slow rise and fall of breath, these were universal. An odd little custom surrounded the telling of ghost stories. It was said that if you told one too late into the night, you must end with a prayer or a joke to keep spirits from entering the hut. Many storytellers added a quick line of humor or thanks at the end, just to break the spell of the tale. Fear was allowed to visit, but never to stay. You imagine the father finishing a story about a wandering monk who tricked the frost into melting. His last words hang in the air. The children laugh softly. The mother shakes her head, pretending to scold but smiling all the same. Then quiet returns. The only sound is the soft pop of wood, the slow hum of the fire, the creak of the hut settling deeper into night. There is ongoing discussion among folklorists about how oral stories changed through repetition. Some say that memory acted like a living editor, polishing tales as they passed from voice to voice. Others argue that each telling was unique, shaped by the mood of the night, the smell of the fire, and the weight of hunger or joy. What is certain is no two winters ever held the same story in quite the same way. It is widely recorded that during harsh winters, stories served as both escape and prayer. The supernatural often appeared not as threat, but as comfort. Ghosts of ancestors were said to visit quietly, listening beside the hearth. People believed that telling stories of the dead helped keep their souls warm. In that sense, storytelling was not just pastime, it was remembrance. A lesser-known practice existed in the Highlands. Families would leave an empty stool near the fire for unseen guests during long nights. It was called the seat of memory. No one sat on it, no one touched it, but its presence made the room feel fuller, safer. You can imagine how comforting it was to glance at that space and feel less alone. An unusual superstition told that if the fire crackled during a story, it meant the tale pleased the spirits. Listeners would nod and murmur thanks to the flame before continuing. If the fire sputtered or hissed, the storyteller would pause, sip ale, and change the subject. The fire was the silent judge of every performance. You close your eyes and listen to the imagined voice of the father continuing his story. His tone rises and falls like a lullaby. The flickering light makes his shadow dance across the wall, tall and thin. The children lean against one another, half asleep but unwilling to miss a word. The mother's hands move gently through her daughter's hair. Each word drifts upward into the dark, mingling with the smoke and disappearing into the rafters like incense. Some researchers question whether storytelling truly eased hardship or simply filled silence. Perhaps both are true. To speak is to defy despair, to turn emptiness into sound. In this hut, that defiance feels gentle, not loud. Each story is a flame, flickering but persistent, lighting another small space inside the mind. Folklore hints at one final winter ritual. On the last night of the season, families told their oldest story, the one they had carried longest. It might have been about a saint, a lost traveler, or an ancestor's kindness. When it ended, the storyteller would let the fire burn low, watching the last spark fade while everyone remained silent. The story, like the season, was allowed to rest. You open your eyes again. The fire has dimmed to red coals. The room glows faintly, shadows stretching and swaying. The family is asleep, their faces peaceful, their breaths soft. Even the animals are still. You can almost feel the echo of the story lingering in the air, a thread of warmth too light to see but impossible to forget. In this small hut, where words and fire have worked together to outlast the cold, you understand how history itself was kept alive. Not in books, not in monuments, but in the quiet rhythm of voices passing warmth from one generation to the next. The fire crackles once, loud in the silence, and then quiets again. The smell of wood smoke and melted snow fills the air. You sit close to the hearth, your eyes tracing the red veins of the embers. The night feels softer now, no longer sharp and merciless, but heavy with waiting. It is the last stretch of winter, the final patience before rebirth. It is widely recorded that the closing weeks of winter carried a kind of stillness unlike any other time. The rhythm of survival slowed. People had grown used to the dark, to the sameness of days, and even as they longed for spring, part of them feared its coming. Change, after all, could be as dangerous as cold. The ice that fed the wells might flood when it melted, and the roads, frozen for months, would turn to rivers of mud. You can sense that mood in the room. The family is quieter now. The children sleep more soundly. The adults talk less. The fire needs less tending, as if both it and the people who keep it have settled into a calm rhythm of endurance. The cold no longer bites with surprise. It simply exists, a familiar companion near its farewell. A curious detail often overlooked is how people could read the approach of spring not through color or light, but through sound. The drip of thawing ice became the music of awakening. The creak of frozen wood softened. The wind lost its sharp edge. These were signs the earth was stretching after its long sleep. For those living in wooden huts, each tiny change in the air was like a whisper of promise. According to village records from centuries past, the last weeks of frost were marked by small celebrations known as warming feasts. Neighbors would gather whatever they could spare, sometimes only broth or bread, and share it in gratitude for survival. There was no grand ceremony, only the simple joy of sitting close, speaking softly, and realizing that another winter had been endured. An odd little custom survived in remote valleys. When the first bird was seen in late February, families would greet it aloud, calling it by the name Hope. Children were told to bow to the bird and whisper wishes for the coming season. The gesture might sound quaint now, but it carried a quiet power. In a world where so much depended on patience, seeing a bird meant proof that waiting had not been in vain. You glance toward the small window. The frost there is melting, drop by drop. The glass gleams faintly in the firelight, each drop reflecting a tiny flame. You can almost imagine hearing the world outside preparing to move again, the snow sighing, the trees murmuring beneath their frozen bark. There is ongoing discussion among cultural historians about whether people of the Middle Ages experienced the change of seasons as renewal or simply repetition. Some say they celebrated each spring as miracle, while others argue it was met with weary relief. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. After months of darkness, even a small patch of thawed ground must have looked like paradise. It is widely recorded that the last days of cold were filled with rituals of cleansing. Ash from the hearth was scattered outside the door to mark the boundary between old and new. Floors were swept, straw was replaced, and smoke was allowed to clear from the roof hole in great plumes. To watch that smoke drift upward into the pale sky was to release winter itself. A lesser-known tradition from Ireland described the sleeping fire. On the last night of frost, families would let their hearth burn completely out for the first time all season. In the morning, they would light a new flame from the embers of a neighbor's hearth, symbolizing community and rebirth. Each house carried part of another's warmth, and in that way, the village began spring as one body. You imagine that moment now, the family waking before sunrise, the air cold and clean. The father carries a small clay pot, glowing faintly within, borrowed from next door. The new fire catches with a soft rush of light. The children clap, the mother smiles, and the scent of renewal fills the hut. After months of smoke and struggle, it must feel like breathing for the first time. An unusual superstition surrounded this new flame. It was believed that if someone spoke angrily before the fire was relit, the warmth would falter all year. So people greeted the first light with silence or laughter, holding their tongues as if words themselves could chill the air. That silence was not empty, it was reverence, a recognition of how thin the line between life and loss truly was. You sit still now, letting that image settle into you. The fire before you crackles gently, its glow deep and steady. The hut feels lighter, as if it too is ready to exhale. Beyond the walls, the snow gleams faintly, waiting for the first melt. Inside, everything is quiet except for the soft hum of sleeping breath. Some researchers question whether those final winter nights carried sadness alongside relief. To leave behind the stillness meant returning to work, to hunger for new harvests, to the noise of the world. Perhaps there was a small grief in saying goodbye to the dark. Yet even grief here feels tender, folded within gratitude. You lean closer to the fire and whisper, just as they once did, rest, flame, and wake again. The light flickers, as if answering. You understand now that winter was never the enemy. It was the slow teacher, the one that taught them how to listen, how to share warmth, and how to wait for the miracle of return. The night grows softer. The frost fades from the window. Somewhere far off, water drips from the eaves, steady and calm. You can almost feel the earth shifting beneath the snow, preparing for its next breath. Inside this tiny hut, surrounded by smoke and silence, you feel it too. The cold is almost over. Spring is waiting. The fire burns higher tonight, steady and golden. Outside, the snow has begun to shrink in patches, leaving behind small pools of silver water that gleam under the moonlight. The air carries a faint change that is almost too subtle to name. You breathe it in and taste the difference. It is not warmth exactly, but promise. The world is shifting. It is widely recorded that people of the Middle Ages greeted the first thaw with reverence. They saw it as both an ending and a beginning, a fragile bridge between hardship and renewal. The melting snow was a miracle, but it also exposed what winter had hidden: mud, rot, and the bones of what had not survived the cold. Spring arrived not in beauty, but in honesty. You look toward the family gathered near the fire. The father mends a tool handle, the mother spins yarn from a pile of wool, and the children play quietly on the floor, tracing shapes in the ashes. The rhythm of their movements feels familiar now, yet something has changed. There is lightness in their gestures, as though their bodies remember what ease feels like. A curious detail often forgotten is that the first sign of thaw inside a hut was not light but sound. The dripping from the roof became a lullaby, a gentle percussion marking the season's change. People paused to listen. They called it the Song of the Eaves. It was the world's way of whispering, "You made it." According to chronicles written by travelers, early spring smelled unlike any other time. The air carried damp wood, wet earth, smoke, and faint sweetness from sap waking beneath bark. It was not a clean scent, but a living one. The ground seemed to breathe again. For people who had lived months surrounded by frost, that smell alone could bring tears. An odd little custom existed in northern villages. On the first day, when water ran freely from the roof, families washed their hands in it before breakfast. It was said to cleanse the old season from their skin. Children laughed as the icy droplets hit their palms, while adults performed the ritual in silence, thinking of those who had not lived to see the melt. You imagine the cold water trickling from the thatch, clear as glass, and the family stepping outside into the soft grey light. The father tilts his head back, letting the water touch his face. The mother catches a few drops in her palm and brushes them across her children's cheeks. Their laughter breaks the hush of the morning like a hymn. There is ongoing discussion among historians about how medieval people marked the arrival of spring compared to modern celebrations. Some describe solemn rituals of gratitude, others small feasts filled with song. But nearly all accounts agree that the transition was emotional, almost sacred. The thaw meant survival. It meant the earth still remembered them. It is widely recorded that the first tasks of spring were simple and careful. Fires were cleaned, ashes spread over the fields to fertilize new crops. Fences were mended, roofs checked for damage, tools sharpened. Each act carried quiet joy. Work was no longer just survival, but preparation for life. A lesser-known detail from medieval diaries mentions the first barefoot step onto thawed ground. It was said that whoever placed their foot on living soil before anyone else in the village would be blessed with strength for the year. People waited for the perfect morning, when frost had truly gone, then pressed their feet into the mud, laughing at the chill. You can almost feel that soft shock of cold now, grounding and real. An unusual superstition spoke of the spring fire. On the night before planting, villagers carried embers from their hearths into the fields, waving them gently over the soil to bless it. The glowing arcs of light dotted the dark hillsides like moving stars. The act joined home and earth, reminding all that warmth belonged to both. You return to the hut in your mind. The family has begun to tidy the space, sweeping the floor, shaking out blankets, opening the door to the crisp air. Light pours in where darkness had ruled for months. The air feels larger, fresher, alive. The cow shifts in her corner, stamping her hooves impatiently for pasture. Even the dog lifts its head, sniffing the breeze with new interest. Some researchers question whether this joy was pure or cautious. After all, famine still loomed before the first harvest. But even fragile hope is powerful. People learned to celebrate what existed instead of what was missing. Each drop of melting snow was a small triumph, each breath of warm air a hymn. You watch the fire's reflection on the floorboards, flickering across damp spots where melted frost has dripped from the roof. The family sits together, their faces bright in the changing light. The father speaks quietly, perhaps about planting or rebuilding. The children listen, their eyes full of a future that suddenly feels possible. Folklore hints at one more ritual to mark the end of winter. Families gathered a small handful of the last remaining snow and tossed it into the fire, watching it hiss and vanish. They called it feeding spring. The sound of melting was the year's first laughter. You close your eyes and picture that moment. The snow melting into steam, the scent of wood and water blending, the laughter filling the small hut. It is not grand, not loud, but perfect in its simplicity. The fire hums, the air softens, and everything alive leans toward the coming light. You understand then that the story of winter is not about cold at all. It is about what refuses to die. The last frost has come and gone. The hut that once felt sealed in darkness now hums with light. You wake to the smell of wet earth and wood smoke, the kind that clings to early spring mornings. A soft golden haze spills through the window, falling on the floor where yesterday's puddles have dried. The fire still burns, but smaller now, almost ceremonial, as if it too understands that its long vigil is ending. It is widely recorded that in the first days of spring, medieval families opened their huts wide to the air. Doors were unbarred, shutters pushed aside, and the smoke that had thickened through the long months finally drifted away. What filled the space next was not silence but life itself. Birds calling, dripping water, the faint hum of thawed streams. After months of confinement, the sound of the outside world was a kind of music. You watch as the family stirs. The mother folds blankets, still heavy with the scent of wool and smoke. The father steps out to fetch water, his breath visible but faint. The children sit up slowly, squinting in the sudden brightness. For the first time in weeks, the air inside the hut feels light, thin, and free of winter's weight. A curious detail often forgotten is how the first sunlight changed everything. It struck the floor and walls at new angles, revealing stains, soot, and cracks hidden by months of dimness. So spring cleaning was not merely vanity but renewal. Families scrubbed, mended, and rearranged, not just to prepare for planting but to remind themselves that life had shape and rhythm again. According to village chronicles, this act of reopening the home was celebrated with simple rituals. Some sprinkled the doorway with ashes mixed with herbs to ward off sickness. Others hung small bunches of dried flowers near the window to welcome good fortune. Everything had meaning. The smallest gesture, even sweeping dust into the wind, became an offering to the returning Sunday. An odd little custom appeared in certain Highland regions. On the first day warm enough to open the door, the eldest person in the household would walk outside barefoot and whisper into the soil, "Wake gently." The belief was that the earth, like a sleeping friend, should be greeted softly, never startled. You can imagine that first touch of damp ground underfoot, cold but alive. You step outside now in your imagination, feeling what they must have felt. The light is thin but real, the air sharp with the smell of thawed pine and melting snow. The sky looks wider than you remembered. The sound of a distant stream trickles through the quiet. Every sense is awake again. There is ongoing discussion among social historians about how deeply medieval people felt connected to the turning of seasons. Some call it dependence, others call it reverence. To them, nature was both parent and teacher. Its cycles shaped their hunger, their prayers, even their dreams. The end of winter was not simply relief, it was resurrection. It is widely recorded that many households offered small prayers of gratitude when the frost finally broke. For bread to come, for warmth that stays, they would say, often while holding a hand over the fire one last time. These words did not belong to any single faith. They were older, part of the language of endurance that every generation had spoken in its own way. A lesser-known detail from one traveller's diary describes how people often left a bit of food outside for the spirits of winter. Bread, milk, or honey was placed near the doorway with a simple message, "Go in peace." It was a way of thanking the cold for its lessons, acknowledging that even hardship had its place. You turn back toward the hut. The walls that once trapped the smoke now glow faintly gold in the new light. The animals are restless, sensing the season's change. The cow stomps her hooves, eager for pasture. The dog noses the door, tail twitching. The children laugh as they chase a stray chicken that slips past their feet into the yard. Life, once quiet and contained, spills outward again. An unusual superstition claimed that laughter was sacred on the first day of spring. Whoever laughed before noon would carry joy through the year. So families found reasons to smile, even if only at the smallest things: the sound of dripping water, the sight of green shoots breaking through frost, the absurdity of having survived another winter together.